Jaime Lannister did not sleep the night before he first suspected Cersei's intention to unleash Wildfire upon King's Landing. Sleep was a scarce luxury for him these days, overshadowed by the burdens of duty, guilt, and the ghosts of past mistakes that crowded his mind. He lay awake on the bed in his modest chambers, recently modest, since so many of the Lannister fortunes had been redirected toward the war and the debts owed to the Iron Bank. Not that grandeur had ever truly comforted him. His once sumptuous rooms in the White Tower, where the Kingsguard was housed, felt colder than a crypt now, bleak in their emptiness. Even the presence of Bronn's raucous voice or the echoes of the Red Keep's busy corridors did little to dissolve his restlessness. Cersei's posture in recent months had been coiled, ready to strike. Whenever Jaime approached her, he saw in her eyes the same ruthless gleam he had glimpsed once before in King Aerys's gaze when he had threatened to burn the entire city to ash. That memory haunted Jaime's nights as much as the day he betrayed his vow by slaying that very king. Yet in all his nightmares, and he had plenty, he never believed he would see that mania reflected in his sister's face. Something had changed in her, the fear of losing everything, perhaps, or the bitterness that followed the humiliations she had endured. Or maybe it was the unrelenting knowledge that no one in King's Landing truly loved or respected her. Not the small folk, not the lords. There was only fear of the Queen Mother, and Cersei, like all cornered lions, reacted best to fear. But it was a poison running through her veins. Night eventually yielded to a dull, watery dawn. Jaime rose before the sun fully broke over the city's rooftops and donned his new golden hand, fastening it with quick, familiar movements. Even so many seasons after Qyburn had fitted him with the contraption, it felt as cumbersome as the day he first wore it. He had grown accustomed to it in public, to hiding its deficiencies behind a confident sneer or the stance of a swordsman who no longer truly existed. But in private, alone, Jaime felt incomplete. Not only in body, but in spirit. Even his arrival at the small table near the tall, narrow window felt like a betrayal of the man he once was, the man who could fling open any door in the Red Keep, champion or king's slayer, lethal with a blade and fearless in the face of scorn. When morning light bled into his chambers, he raked his fingers through his hair, remembering how it used to glow like beaten gold. Now streaks of silver teased his temples as though time itself had worn him down. His reflection in the small mirror by the window made him frown, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the grim determination carved into his mouth. He barely recognized himself. Only the name Lannister and its burdensome legacy still clung to him, an invisible cloak far heavier than any Kingsguard's armor. He heard footsteps at his door, the scraping of leather boots, and an exchange of muffled words. A pair of Red Keep guards, loyal to the Queen, loyal to the crown, though Jaime knew loyalty in King's Landing was bought with gold more often than with honor. He cursed under his breath, stood up, and opened the door before they could knock. Ser Lancel's cousin, one of them anyway, looked up with an uneasy stare. They spoke too quietly to be overheard by curious castle staff, but Jaime knew their message would be from Cersei. She was summoning him, no doubt with some demand or some complaint about the High Sparrow, though that man was now only a memory of soot and rubble, or perhaps about the lords who dared question her overreaching hand in the affairs of the crown. When he arrived at the main hall, the echo of his boots on the marble floor seemed too loud. Columns rose on either side like silent sentinels, proud yet ominous. Shafts of light angled down from tall windows, dust motes swirling in their glow. The stench of old incense and disappointment lingered in the air. At the far end, near the Iron Throne, Cersei stood with the air of a storm about to break. Her crimson gown shimmered with gold embroidery reminiscent of a lion's mane, and her hair was cut short, still the brutal reminder of her walk of atonement. When she noticed him, her lips pressed into a thin line, as though weighing whether to greet him with anger or forced affection. They exchanged words that cut deeper than any blade. She questioned his loyalty in that half-jesting, half-biting manner she had perfected. He noticed how her delicate fingers curled around the hilt of a small ornamental dagger at her waist, and his heart lurched at the familiarity of it all. Cersei had always been cunning, always manipulative, but now there was a fury behind her eyes as though she might lash out at any moment. And Jaime, who had once sworn to protect her above all else, felt an unfamiliar wariness. She was his sister, his beloved, the mother of his children, and yet the lines she was crossing in her desperation filled him with dread. A suspicious hush had settled over King's Landing since Cersei's triumph at the September of Baelor. The populace had not forgotten the day she rid herself of the High Sparrow and his zealots by bathing the holy site in green flame. The memory was etched into the city's stones, and the smell of smoke lingered in the nightmares of children. Jaime remembered that day too well, how the great September, once the soul of the city, had blossomed into a pillar of emerald fire, taking hundreds of souls with it. Including Marjorie Tyrell and the last threads of alliance Jaime had hoped to maintain with Highgarden. He had returned to find the city in chaos and Cersei crowned queen upon the ashes of her enemies. Even Tommen, his sweet son, had chosen death rather than a life overshadowed by his mother's violence. Jaime hadn't forgiven her for that, and in many ways, he hadn't forgiven himself. But now, rumors danced in the gloom of alleyways. Whispers that the queen had not used all of the caches of Wildfire, that she was plotting something far larger, something cataclysmic. The notion was so unthinkable that Jaime had hoped it was naught but drunken gossip. But a kernel of suspicion gnawed at his belly every time he remembered the moment he had found the Mad King perched on the Iron Throne, mania flaring in his eyes as he screamed, "Burn them all!" That same glint now flashed in Cersei's gaze whenever she looked at the city from the Red Keep's tallest balconies. Perhaps it was just a fearful fancy, Jaime told himself. But something compelled him to investigate. Days passed intense awareness. He spoke to the pyromancers with friendly courtesy, though they grew quiet whenever he approached. Their faces were as sour as day-old milk, their eyes darting. Jaime recognized a cover-up when he saw one. Still, he had no proof. He sought Qyburn, but the man was as elusive as a shadow, always busy with important tasks for the queen. And so Jaime prowled the twisting passages beneath the Red Keep, using old memories from his years in the Kingsguard, from times when he had known about the hideaways and cellars that snaked beneath the city. He recalled that Aerys had hidden stockpiles of Wildfire in secret vaults, planning to detonate them as a last, mad stroke if the rebels ever breached the walls. Had all of those caches been discovered and destroyed long ago? Or had some been quietly moved or left to rot? One night he found the proof. There was a small door, half hidden by rotting barrels, that led to a cramped alcove. Stacks of dusty crates, each marked with the pyromancer's sigil, filled a corner. When Jaime pried one open with his golden hand, he found small glass jars swirling with a sickly greenish hue. They were illusions of serenity, but he knew their power. Enough Wildfire to blow a whole district sky high. He closed the lid carefully, dread settling upon him like a lead weight. How many were hidden here? Dozens of crates lined the walls. Enough to rival the destruction at the September, enough to do something unimaginable if all were detonated at once. He replaced the lid, heart pounding in his chest. A flicker of a torch approached from somewhere nearby, and he fled before he was discovered, slipping back upstairs through a different route, all the while cursing under his breath. It was more than rumor. Cersei had learned nothing from the horrors she had unleashed. Either she was planning to hold the city hostage, ensuring absolute terror and obedience by the threat of annihilation, or worse, she intended to use the Wildfire for real. Her mania, stoked by vengeance, might push her to do something that would rival the very madness Jaime had once ended with a sword thrust into the Mad King's back. He wrestled with the knowledge, uncertain whom he could trust. The small council was a joke composed mostly of sycophants and creatures hand-picked by Cersei or Qyburn. The lords who might oppose her were either too far away to intervene or too frightened by her unpredictability. The truth hammered at Jaime's mind. He was the only one with both the authority and the intimate knowledge to stop her. But how? He could already hear her mocking voice if he confronted her openly. Traitor? Do you forget who wears the crown, Jaime? Or do you simply yearn to sink your blade into another monarch's back? She would throw his betrayal of Aerys at him, twist the tale to discredit him. He doubted even the King's Guard would side with him if she turned them all against him. She was a queen, he was, in name, the Lord Commander of her King's Guard. But in reality, he felt more like a relic, an afterthought. And yet, something more profound and painful underlay his indecision. He still loved her. Despite everything, despite the blazing ruin she had become, he had cherished her since they were children. She was his sister, his twin, the mother of his children, all tangled into one forbidden bond. He had lied and killed and betrayed oaths for her. So how could he even think of putting an end to her the way he ended Aerys? The idea carved a jagged wound in him, but the evidence of her intentions was undeniable. She would turn King's Landing into a charred grave if it meant preserving her power. And in Jaime's mind, the screams of thousands of innocent people, men, women, and children echoed with horrifying clarity. He had saved them once from a mad monarch. Was he doomed to do it again? Those days following his discovery blurred together in a suffocating haze. He found little rest. He doubled his patrols, talked to the guards, subtly trying to probe their loyalty. Most seemed either ignorant or afraid. Meanwhile, Cersei began complaining about rebel pockets in the city, about traitors who would see her dethroned. She planned more arrests, more public displays of dominance. Jaime tried to reason with her, carefully at first, suggesting they focus on unity and stability rather than retribution. Her temper flared and she scorned him openly in front of the council. At times, she would withdraw into moody silence and brood in her rooms for hours, perhaps even days, refusing to see him, as if she sensed his silent opposition and was mustering her own defenses. In a quieter moment, when the sun was setting behind the spires of the Red Keep and the corridors were filled with dying light, Jaime found Cersei alone in her chambers. He had not been summoned, but he took the liberty of entering anyway. She sat by the fireplace, the warm glow dancing across her pale features. In that moment, she almost looked like the woman he had once adored without question, only the bitterness tightening her lips betrayed the change. "Come closer," she said in a voice devoid of warmth. Jaime approached, heart pounding. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. She stared at the flames for a long time before she spoke. "They all hate me, you know? And if they had any courage, they'd slit my throat the moment I step outside this castle." Jaime tried to find a gentler tone. "The city has seen too much blood. If you offered them an olive branch, if you showed them mercy." "Mercy?" She turned to him, one eyebrow arched. "You sound like father. You think being merciful to our enemies saved him from the stranger's embrace? They showed him no mercy when they stuck him with that crossbow." She paused, knuckles white where they clutched the arm of her chair. "Kindness is a weakness. You and I both learned that lesson. I will not let them dethrone me or humiliate me again. I will not let them take my last child from me." Jaime's breath caught, remembering Tommen, remembering how the boy had flung himself to his death when he learned of the September's destruction. "We have no children left," Jaime said softly, though it pained him to state the truth. Myrcella was murdered in Dorne, Joffrey killed at his own wedding, and Tommen, he... Cersei's eyes flashed, tears threatening but not falling. "He was weak, that sweet boy. They preyed on him, made him believe he couldn't trust his own mother. He died because they poisoned his mind." Jaime shut his eyes for a moment. It was always someone else's fault. Cersei would never acknowledge that her own actions might have driven Tommen to that desperate end. A wave of anger surged within him, but also sorrow. He reached out, laid his golden hand gently on her shoulder. She flinched. He thought of a time when she would have leaned into him, sought his warmth. "Cersei," he whispered, "don't do anything rash. The city is on the brink." "So you'd have me surrender like a mewling babe," she hissed. "Bend the knee to our enemies and pray they don't slaughter us in our beds? You fool, Jaime. You should understand better than anyone that fear is the only language these people speak. If we do not show them we are strong, they will tear us apart." Her voice dropped, dangerously soft. "I will never let them. I will burn this city to the ground before I kneel. And you, my dear brother, you will stand by me or be swept aside." He looked at her for a long moment, his stomach twisted in knots. There was no reasoning with her. She was too far gone. She reminded him of Ares, who had tried to crush Robert's rebellion through the terror of Wildfire. Jaime had done the unthinkable once. But this was different. He could not bring himself to imagine what it would mean to spill her blood. Still, a chilling certainty settled over him. If she lit that green flame again, thousands would perish. He left her chambers feeling as though the walls were closing in. That night, he roamed the castle's corridors, the flickering torchlight throwing his shadow grotesquely against the stone. He paced in front of the chamber of the painted table, near the small council chambers, near the library, as if searching for an answer that refused to show itself. The weight of his duty pressed on him, straining the fragile remains of his devotion to Cersei. He wanted to weep, to rage, to run back to her and shake sense into her. Instead, he wandered until dawn, visited the stables, gazed at the Red Keep's ramparts. Everywhere he turned, the ghost of King Ares whispered in his ear, "Burn them all." Over and over again. By the next morning, Jaime made his decision. He found Bronn in the courtyard, sparring with a pair of recruits. The clang of steel echoed under the gray sky. Bronn, never one for ceremony, acknowledged Jaime with a sideways glance, nearly disarming the younger knight who tried to take advantage of his momentary distraction. When the spar concluded, Bronn stood, chest heaving, and waited for Jaime to speak. Jaime beckoned him aside, out of earshot. "I need your help," Jaime said curtly. Bronn's grin was sardonic as he wiped sweat from his brow. That's hardly news, Lord Commander. You need my help more often than not these days. This is different. And if you breathe a word of it to anyone else. Bronn's smirk vanished, replaced by cautious curiosity. I know how to keep my mouth shut, especially if there's gold in it for me. Jaime swallowed. You'll have more gold than you can count if you do this for me. But it's dangerous. Bronn's eyebrow shot up, interest peaked. Danger is my specialty. Spit it out. Jaime glanced around to ensure they were alone. Cersei. She's stockpiling more wildfire. Enough to blow half the city sky high if she's cornered. I need to find a way to ensure it never gets used. Quietly, without alerting her. She has eyes everywhere. Bronn let out a low whistle. 7 hells. That's a tall order even for me. And why not just talk her out of it? Jaime's face hardened. We've passed that point. Bronn nodded slowly, his dark eyes flickering with unspoken calculations. All right then. But if I cross her, my head'll be on a spike next to that damned High Sparrow. Are you sure you can keep me alive? Jaime forced a grim smile. I'll do my best. He clapped Bronn on the shoulder, the cold metal of his golden hand meeting leather. Start by scouring the cellars, the old storehouses. Find out where they're keeping it, how many caches there are. Don't disturb anything. Just see how big of a mess we're dealing with. Over the next days, Bronn slipped through shadows and enlisted a handful of trusted cutthroats, men with no love for the crown but a keen ear for coin. They mapped the labyrinth beneath the Red Keep, identified carefully sealed storerooms, eavesdropped on pyromancers' conversations, and discovered fresh shipments from the Alchemists' Guild quietly delivered at night. By the time Bronn reported back, Jaime's worst fears were confirmed. The wildfire caches spread across 5 hidden vaults. Each vault held enough jars to replicate the September of Baelor disaster many times over. Jaime's throat constricted when he heard the details, for he imagined the city going up in green flames that would blot out the sun. He had to stop it. But how? Destroying wildfire was no simple feat. A clumsy spark could set off a chain reaction, tearing half the Red Keep apart. If he tried to confiscate it openly, Cersei would know and she'd retaliate. He began to consider infiltration, smuggling the jars out of the city to some remote location or submerging them in the waters of Blackwater Bay, but the risk of detection was immense. And if Cersei found out, she might expedite her plans. One misstep and she would press the trigger. That was the problem with kings and queens who fancied themselves gods. They held entire cities hostage with a single command. A few nights later, Jaime summoned Bronn again, this time to a private courtyard behind the training yard. The moon cast a silver glow and a few crickets chirped in the bushes. Jaime explained his new idea, sabotage. If they could slip into the vaults and quietly sabotage the jars, perhaps by letting in water from the sewers or removing certain key ingredients that stabilized the compound, then the wildfire might become inert or at least far less volatile. It was a desperate gamble, but with Qyburn's watchers and the pyromancers crawling about, it might be more feasible than carting dozens of jars out. Bronn, leaning against a wall with arms folded, considered the plan. Tricky, he said. You'll need an alchemist of your own or someone who understands the stuff well enough not to blow us to the 7 hells. Leave that to me, Jaime said grimly. He still knew a few old contacts from when he had dealt with the Alchemists' Guild as a Kingsguard to Ares. Perhaps a disgruntled pyromancer who resented Cersei's tyranny. He just needed to find the right man. They worked quickly. Each new day brought fresh rumors of the Queen's anger. Cersei had begun arresting minor lords suspected of plotting treason. The small folk whispered that she would do anything to hold onto the throne, that her cruelty was unmatched by any monarch since Maegor the Cruel. Jaime wanted to deny it, but fear churned in his stomach every time he stepped into the throne room to see her perched upon the Iron Throne, the mountain of melted swords towering over them both, a savage monument to conquest. While Bronn and his hired hands laid the groundwork for sabotage, Jaime haunted the corridors, searching for the right pyromancer. Eventually, he found Pyromancer Valen, an aging man with shaky hands but keen knowledge. Valen hated Qyburn, a charlatan. He called him under his breath, and he seemed disillusioned with the Queen's command. Though reluctant at first, the promise of gold and the chance to escape King's Landing safely swayed him. He agreed to help them neutralize the wildfire caches, provided they took him far away from the Crown's wrath once done. Quietly, with the cunning of conspirators, they enacted their plan. Late one evening, Bronn's men subdued the guards at one of the vaults, tying them up without bloodshed to avoid unnecessary alarm. Pyromancer Valen quickly set to work, opening crates and carefully removing small amounts of a stabilizing agent from each jar. It was delicate labor, each jar a potential catastrophe. Jaime stood guard, sweat beading on his brow, hand on his sword's hilt. Though he had once been the Kingslayer, the best swordsman in the realm, he felt helpless in the face of these fragile glass containers that could level entire city blocks. One misstep and a sea of green flame would devour them all. But luck was with them that night. Valen neutralized the entire vault, and by the time the dawn light seeped through the cracks in the walls, the jars were all worthless. The wildfire remained visually unchanged, so if Cersei's loyal pyromancers inspected them superficially, they might not detect the sabotage right away. They repeated the process for 2 more vaults over subsequent nights, each infiltration bolder than the last, and each leaving Jaime's nerves more frayed. Sleep eluded him entirely now, and he could see the worry etched into Bronn's face as well. They were courting disaster if they were caught. Then, midway through their campaign of sabotage, Jaime discovered something that made his blood run cold. There were not 5 vaults, but 6. Cersei had an additional cache hidden in the bowels of the Red Keep, deeper than any known storeroom. Worse yet, word reached Jaime that Cersei had started to wonder about him. He was absent too often, coming and going at odd hours. A hush had fallen over certain corridors, and more of Qyburn's little birds roamed about. If she discovered their plot before they neutralized the last caches, everything would be lost. Jaime realized he might not have the time or the secrecy to sabotage the final vault. That night, as he wrestled with restless thoughts, a quiet knock came at his chamber door. Startled, Jaime grabbed his sword and cautiously opened it to reveal Brienne of Tarth. She had arrived in King's Landing on a mission from Sansa Stark. Something about negotiating the release of certain captured knights loyal to the north. Jaime had scarcely had a moment to see her, but here she was, tall, imposing, clad in simple mail beneath a cloak. She slipped inside, glancing around warily. "What are you doing here?" Jaime asked, though he felt relief wash over him at the sight of her. Brienne had a grounding presence, an unwavering sense of honor he had come to respect. Still, he feared for her safety if she was seen with him in these perilous times. "I heard rumors," she said bluntly. "Rumors about Cersei Wildfire, and that you were meddling in it. Tell me it isn't true." Jaime stared at her, at the scar on her cheek that reminded him of their shared trials. He took a long breath. In that moment, he realized he needed an ally he could truly trust, someone with unwavering integrity. "It is true," he said softly, shutting the door. "But I'm trying to stop her. She's gone too far, Brienne." She searched his eyes for a long, silent moment, as if measuring the truth in them. "I can't believe you'd stand against her," she said, her tone tinged with surprise and something akin to admiration. "But if what the rumors say is correct, then we can't let it happen again. Innocent people will die." Jaime nodded. "I won't let that happen. I was once called Kingslayer for stopping this very madness. Now I fear I may have to do it again." The words caught in his throat. He could not bring himself to say more. He could not utter the possibility of having to kill his sister. Brienne bowed her head. "Then let me help. I have no love for Queen Cersei and her ways. But if this is about protecting the innocent, I'll do what's right." A flicker of gratitude warmed Jaime's chest. They spoke quietly, hatching a plan. Brienne could serve as a distraction while Bronn, Valen, and a handful of trusted soldiers sabotaged the last vault. She would request an audience with Cersei regarding negotiations for the north, drawing her attention away so that Jaime's conspirators could move unseen. But they had to act fast. Every day brought them closer to discovery. At dawn, the plan was put into motion. Brienne sent word requesting a formal audience. Jaime was to appear in the throne room as well, ensuring Cersei believed all was normal. Meanwhile, Bronn would lead Valen and a small crew deep beneath the Red Keep, tackling that final vault of Wildfire. The risk was immense. If Cersei became suspicious even for a moment, she might order a search of the subterranean passages, or come down herself with a torch in hand, an image Jaime dreaded to even imagine. The throne room was crowded when Jaime arrived. Courtiers, guards, minor lords, and ladies, all jockeying for favor or bracing for one of Cersei's wrathful decrees. He stood by the foot of the Iron Throne, wearing his Kingsguard armor and golden sword at his hip. His gaze flicked over the assembly, landing on Brienne, who strode forward with resolute confidence. Cersei watched her with undisguised disdain. The negotiations began, Brienne petitioned for a release of certain men loyal to the Starks and Tullis captured during skirmishes around Riverrun. Cersei countered with demands, insults, and a mocking laugh about how the North should bend the knee. Jaime tuned out the posturing. He was focused on the ticking clock in his mind, praying that Bronn and the others would succeed before Cersei wrapped up this farce of an audience. Beads of sweat prickled beneath Jaime's armor. He tried to intervene in the negotiation when tension rose, playing mediator, mindful to keep Cersei's attention on him and Brienne. But at the corner of his vision, he saw Qyburn slipping in, whispering something to Cersei. Her features darkened. Jaime's heart skipped. Had they been discovered? Cersei abruptly rose from the throne, the hiss of metal echoing as her gown brushed against the swords. I am bored with this. Guards, escort our so-called guest to her chambers while I consider her request. Her lip curled. If I feel merciful, I might grant you an answer before the moon rises. Brienne opened her mouth to protest, but the guards stepped forward to lead her away. Jaime forced himself to remain calm. If he objected too strongly, Cersei would suspect. He glanced at the grand windows, noticing the position of the sun. By now, Bronn should be well into the sabotage. Gods, let them finish in time, he silently prayed. Yet something in Cersei's demeanor set him on edge. She was restless, prowling around the throne. She summoned a pair of pyromancers who scurried to her side. Jaime strained to catch their hushed conversation. The words movement and cellars pricked at his ears. Before he could intervene, Cersei abruptly dismissed the court. Confusion rippled through the lords and ladies as they were ushered out. Jaime made to follow her, but she rounded on him with a venomous gaze. You stay, she commanded coldly. The throne room emptied around them, leaving only a handful of gold cloaks near the doors and Qyburn, who hovered like a ghastly specter. Cersei advanced, her expression unreadable. Tell me, Jaime, do you think I don't notice your little absences? The whispered meetings, the odd looks you give me. Jaime's pulse raced, but he forced a casual shrug. You have become paranoid, sister. If I can't walk about my own castle... Don't lie to me, she hissed, stepping closer. Her eyes burned with a fury that made his stomach twist. You have been meddling. I can smell it on you. Qyburn's little birds have whispered of suspicious men lurking in places they shouldn't. Pyromancer Valen is missing. Did you think me a fool? Jaime realized he was cornered. Word must have gotten out that Valen hadn't been seen for days in the guild's workshops, and Qyburn had put the pieces together. The queen was not as blind as he'd hoped. And now she was ready to strike. Cersei, please, he said, keeping his voice level. You're imagining conspiracies. She slapped him hard across the face. His golden hand rose belatedly, too late to block. The ring on her finger cut a shallow mark on his cheek. He tasted blood. Don't you dare patronize me, she spat. I know you've been down there, tampering with the gifts our father left us. She let out a ragged breath. Why, Jaime? Why would you betray me now after everything we've been through? For a moment, he saw genuine hurt in her eyes, and that almost broke him. But the memory of the city in flames, the tortured screams he imagined, spurred him on. This has to stop, he managed. You can't burn King's Landing to the ground just to keep your throne. Her face hardened. They hate me. They want my blood. If that is the choice, I'll give them blood. I'll give them fire. I'll give them the end of the world before I bow to their whims. Jaime tried to reason with her, though he knew it was futile. There's nothing left for you to protect here, Cersei. All our children are gone. The power you cling to will only bring more death. This path leads nowhere but ruin. Then let there be ruin. Her voice trembled with anger and despair, tears glistening. Let them tremble at the name Lannister. Let them choke on their screams. I've lost everything I ever loved. She looked him up and down with contempt. And you once told me we'd stand together against the world. But you've turned your back on me. Qyburn stepped forward as though to intervene, but Cersei raised a hand to stop him. She and Jaime stood facing each other, the unspoken truth crackling like lightning in the charged air. Suddenly, the throne room doors burst open. Brienne of Tarth, escorted by 2 gold cloaks, marched in. She spotted the confrontation and seemed unsure whether to intercede, but Jaime caught her eye and subtly shook his head. No, this was between him and Cersei now. Cersei noticed Brienne too and let out a bitter laugh. Ah, the Lady of Tarth? Here to defend your precious Sansa? Or to rescue Jaime from the big bad queen? She turned her gaze back to Jaime. You think she can save you now? She's just another soldier in your little conspiracy, isn't she? Brienne's posture stiffened. I serve Lady Sansa. I want no part in your feud beyond preventing a slaughter. Preventing a slaughter? Cersei's voice dripped with sarcasm. Yes, that's precisely what my brother claims he wants to do. How noble of you both. Jaime saw the flicker of motion out of the corner of his eye, guards fanning out around them. Tension coiled. One wrong move and there would be violence. If that happened, who would command the pyromancers below to keep their hands off the wildfire? Could Cersei detonate it on a whim? He decided in a flash that words were spent. They had come too far, and she was too far gone. He drew his sword with his left hand, the clang echoing in the vast chamber. Gasps sounded from the guards. Brienne tensed, uncertain. Cersei's face twisted with a savage sneer. She drew her own dagger, the same ornamental blade Jaime had seen her caress before. How had it come to this? They were twins, lovers once. But now they stood on opposite edges of a treacherous gulf. She lunged without warning. Perhaps she expected him to parry easily or to hesitate. Jaime tried to deflect her thrust, but she was quick, fueled by rage. Her blade glanced off the steel of his breastplate. He seized her wrist with his golden hand, trying to disarm her without hurting her. She snarled, twisting, and slashed at his face again. Jaime reeled backward, his left hand raising his sword. Everything slowed, like the moment he had killed Aerys so many years ago, the moment he had chosen to save the city over his king. He saw the madness in her eyes, the fury and heartbreak. In his mind flashed images of all the people who would die if he did not stop her. She would not relent. If she survived, she would find another way to unleash the wildfire. She would burn them all. The city he had once saved would be lost forever. As she lunged again, Jaime's blade found her chest, sliding between her ribs. It was a shallow thrust, his reflexes faltering at the last instant. He did not want to kill her, not truly. But she gasped, eyes wide, dropping the dagger. Blood blossomed on her gown. Jaime's heart lurched painfully. He had struck the blow he never thought he could deliver. She staggered, her strength failing. Jaime caught her in his arms, sinking to his knees, tears burning hot in his eyes. Brienne stood frozen, as did the guards. No one seemed to know what to do. Cersei's breath rattled in her throat. She stared at him, her expression mingling hate, betrayal, and a flicker of something almost tender. "You," she coughed, blood on her lips. "You are a traitor. Kingslayer." Queenslayer, her voice shook with sobs that might have been laughter or heartbreak. Her eyes glistened with tears. Then, in a ragged whisper, she said, "I loved you." Jaime pressed a trembling hand against her wound, trying vainly to stop the blood. "I loved you too," he said. "I still do." Tears slipped down his cheeks, unbidden. "I'm so sorry." She gazed at him for what felt like an eternity, her lips forming silent words. Then her eyes slid closed and she went limp in his arms. Her final breath escaped in a soft sigh. A hush fell over the throne room. No one moved. Then Brienne stepped forward, laying a hand on Jaime's shoulder. He could not even look at her. He felt numb, hollow, as though he too had died. The world seemed distant and colorless. Cersei was gone, the city saved from her final, terrible plan. But at what cost? Outside, bells began to toll, a low, mournful sound that resonated through the streets of King's Landing. Word spread like wildfire, ironic, Jaime thought with grim bitterness. The queen was dead, killed by the Kingslayer's own hand. Chaos would ensue. The Lannisters would either cling to power or lose it entirely, but the city would live to see another day. No green flames would devour the innocent. Jaime had saved them again, but he had become the monster in the eyes of all who did not know the truth. In the days that followed, the city stood on edge, unsure what came next. The small council scrambled to maintain order. Some nobles called for Jaime's immediate arrest, branding him a regicide twice over. Others recognized that the queen had been on the verge of madness, but fear still guided their actions. For his part, Jaime turned himself in, but the more moderate lords, uncertain how to proceed, placed him under protective watch. Brienne testified on his behalf, though her word alone could not quell the anger of the Lannisters who sought revenge. Tyrell forces, battered and leaderless in the wake of Margaery's death, were hesitant to side with the Lannisters. The North still harbored deep grudges, and the Iron Bank waited like a hungry predator circling wounded prey. Amidst this political maelstrom, Jaime drifted through the Red Keep like a ghost. In quiet moments, he would slip away to a hidden courtyard or an unused chamber to grieve for his sister in solitude. Memories tormented him, the two of them as children running through Casterly Rock's halls, the laughter, the conspiratorial smiles. Then the truth, he had killed her. He had done the unimaginable again. Brienne offered him quiet support, occasionally seeking him out. They did not speak much. Words felt inadequate to bridge the chasm of sorrow and regret. Yet there was a kinship between them, forged through shared hardships and an odd sense of mutual respect. Brienne said she was returning to the north soon, but if Jaime needed her, she would not abandon him. He nodded absently, uncertain of his own future. He wondered if he should stand trial or if he would rather flee the city entirely, letting the Seven Kingdoms decide their fate without him. Meanwhile, the caches of Wildfire that Cersei had so carefully hoarded were discovered, sabotaged, and made harmless. Pyromancers found jar after jar of inert green sludge, worthless for anything but vile-smelling alchemical experiments. Rumor claimed that the sabotage had saved thousands of lives. Jaime never spoke of it openly. He did not need more glory or infamy. The people would whisper about the Queenslayer who had once again turned on his own monarch. And perhaps the city would never understand that his betrayal had been an act of love, love for them, love for life, and in a twisted way, love for Cersei because he couldn't let her become the monster she so feared. A fortnight passed. The corridors of the Red Keep felt emptier without Cersei's presence, without her commanding voice echoing off the stone. Jaime found himself summoned to a hastily convened council meeting, overseen by representatives from several great houses trying to prevent total collapse. Lord Randall Tarly, stern and imposing, was present, as were a few other surviving lords. They debated the next ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, spoke of possible alliances, the need for stability. Some suggested placing Jaime on the throne as a caretaker king, but the notion horrified him. Others insisted on an interim regent until Daenerys Targaryen, rumored to be across the sea, arrived. The debate stretched into the night. Jaime said little, only that he had no desire for the throne. He was not made to be a king, nor did he want to continue the legacy of tyranny and violence. When the meeting ended, and the lords dispersed, Jaime remained behind. He stared at the Iron Throne, jagged and cold, a structure forged by the fires of old. Twice he had stained his blade with royal blood to save the city from a tyrant. Yet he felt no pride, no triumph. Only a profound weariness that seeped into his bones. The next morning he rose early. He donned plain riding leathers, left his Kingsguard cloak folded neatly on his bed. He fastened his golden hand one last time with deliberate care. Then he walked quietly through the Red Keep, a single bag slung over his shoulder. He paused at the stables, where he found Brienne already saddling her horse. She met his gaze and offered a slight nod of acknowledgement. She asked no questions and he offered no explanations. Together, they rode out of the castle gates at dawn, slipping into the streets of King's Landing. Everywhere, people were just beginning to stir. Market stalls opened, children yawned awake, and fishermen cast nets from the banks of the Blackwater. A hush still clung to the city, a city that had narrowly escaped fiery destruction. Jaime looked upon the quiet streets, the tired faces, and felt a rush of conflicting emotions. He was relieved they were safe, but he also knew how precarious peace could be. They set a sept where a group of mourners lit candles for the souls lost in the great September's destruction. Jaime bowed his head, unsure if the gods would ever grant him absolution. Then he and Brienne continued toward the city gates. Perhaps they would ride north or west to Casterly Rock or some other place. Jaime did not know. He only knew he could not remain in King's Landing to watch the aftermath of his deed. He needed distance, time to reckon with who he had become and to discover if there was any part of himself worth salvaging. As they crossed the gates and followed the main road out, Jaime slowed his horse to glance back one final time. The Red Keep loomed in the distance, bathed in the faint morning light, the stone walls tinted with gold. Somewhere within those walls lay the memory of Cersei Lannister, proud and furious, consumed by a longing for power and vengeance. He had tried to save her from herself, but in the end, he had saved the city instead. It was a choice he would have to live with day after day until his last breath. He turned away, guiding his horse forward. The path stretched before him, unknown and frightening, yet also offering a possibility he had once believed closed to him forever, a chance to be more than a kingslayer, more than a man shackled by an infamous past. Perhaps he might find a sliver of honor in a world that had shown him so little mercy. Perhaps he would learn to live with his regret, to carry it not as a curse but as a burden that might inspire some measure of redemption. Beside him, Brienne cast him a sidelong glance. She said nothing, but a faint sadness softened her stern features as though she understood the weight he bore. In the distance, the sunrise painted the sky in delicate hues of pink and orange, promising a new day for King's Landing and for all of Westeros, scarred though it might be. Jaime urged his mount onward, resolute in his silence, and together they rode toward the horizon, leaving behind the ashes and echoes of a broken crown. The road stretched on, dust rising beneath the horse's hooves, and Jaime realized he was weeping softly, quietly. He did not try to stop the tears, for there was no shame in grief. He had lost Cersei, the woman he had once believed was his other half. He had lost the illusions that had bound him to her, illusions of love untainted by cruelty. But in freeing himself from those illusions, he had saved the city once more. Someday, if the gods were just, perhaps the city would remember that not all men in white cloaks were heroes, and not all who killed their kings or queens did so out of ambition. Some did it because they had no other choice. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers from a nearby meadow, a hint of spring. Jaime breathed it in, welcoming the promise of new growth after so much destruction. His tears subsided, leaving a hollow ache in their wake. He was tired, so very tired. But he was alive and free from the chains that had bound him. He had done what needed to be done. Now, at last, he would face the consequences of that choice with open eyes. He thought of Cersei's final words to him, "I loved you." Their entire story was one of tragic love, twisted by power and pride, culminating in a single, irrevocable moment. He wondered if, in the afterlife, she would ever forgive him, or if he would wander the halls of the seven hells, haunted by her screams. He wondered, too, if she might find some measure of peace beyond the mortal realm. The mother of his children, the echo of his own face gone in a heartbeat. A line from some half-remembered song drifted through his mind, for in the darkest night, only the flame of love can guide a wandering soul. But love had not saved Cersei, it had only made her more dangerous, more desperate. And yet, ironically, it was love for her that had driven Jaime to this. By midday, they had reached a fork in the road. One path led north, toward the Riverlands and the distant north, the other curved west, toward the heart of the Lannister lands. Jaime paused, uncertain. Brienne seemed to sense his hesitation. She reined in her horse and spoke quietly. "Which way do you go?" Jaime stared at the signposts. North would lead him closer to the war-torn areas still reeling from the conflicts, and might bring him under the scrutiny of the Starks. West would mean returning to the Rock to face his family's complicated legacy. He let out a long breath. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never felt so aimless." Brienne regarded him, her blue eyes steady. "Come north with me," she said finally. "We can see if there's a place for you in Sansa's court. Or if nothing else, you might find some measure of penance in fighting the evils that still plague the realm." He almost smiled at the irony. Jaime Lannister, a penitent knight in service to House Stark? It was a notion that would have made his younger self roar with laughter. But so much had changed. He needed a purpose, something beyond the clutches of heartbreak and regret. "Yes," he said quietly, surprising even himself. "Let's go north." So they turned their horses in that direction and continued, side by side, at a measured pace. Brienne spoke occasionally of the tasks ahead, of restoring order, of building trust. Jaime listened more than he spoke. He thought of the children who might be spared because the wildfire had been defused. He thought of the men and women who would rise each day without fear of an emerald apocalypse. His heart ached, yet there was a fragile hope weaving through his grief. Perhaps in time he could forgive himself. Perhaps in time the realm would heal, too. After an hour or so, they stopped to water the horses by a small stream. Brienne knelt to fill a canteen, and Jaime took the moment to gaze at his reflection in the water. The lines of his face looked deeper, his eyes wearier. He saw echoes of the man who had once been a vain, arrogant knight. That man was gone. A new Jaime Lannister knelt here, one shaped by heartbreak, by sacrifice, and strangely, by a longing for atonement. He clenched his golden hand, feeling its coldness press against his real flesh, a constant reminder of the price he had paid for his past. They rode on until dusk, stopping at a small inn to rest. Rumors buzzed in the taproom, folk discussing the queen's death, the potential new ruler. Some questioned if dragons would soon swoop in from across the sea. Others whispered about the queen's lair, speculating that Jaime had acted out of ambition, or cunning, or demonic influence. Jaime kept his hood low, letting Brienne do the talking. If anyone recognized him, they said nothing. The small folk were weary of war and hungry for peace. For them, the identity of the killer was less important than the fact that King's Landing had not gone up in flames a second time. In the privacy of their shared table, Brienne studied him. "You look exhausted," she said softly. "You should rest." "I will," he replied. But sleep was a fearsome prospect. In the dark, in his dreams, he feared he would see Cersei's face twisted in rage, or hear the Mad King's cackling echo. Nonetheless, he followed Brienne up the creaking wooden steps to a pair of modest rooms. Before he turned in, she caught his arm. "You did the right thing," she said earnestly. You saved thousands of lives. He nodded, his throat tight. I only wish doing the right thing felt less like damnation. She looked at him with understanding. Honor isn't always a reward, Jaime. Sometimes it's just a burden we choose to bear because it's the only way we can live with ourselves. With that, she gave him a gentle nod and stepped into her room, leaving him alone in the corridor. He entered his room, sat on the edge of the small bed, and set aside his golden hand for the night. He stared at the stump of his wrist, remembering how Qyburn had once peered at it with morbid fascination. Memories rolled over him, of holding Cersei in his arms, of seeing her eyes widen with mortal hurt, and the final exhalation of her life. That memory threatened to crush him with guilt, even though he knew there had been no other way. Better to slay one mad monarch than let thousands burn. But repeated enough, that logic rang hollow in the emptiness of his heart. He lay down, boots still on, and eventually sleep claimed him. Nightmares came as expected. He was in the throne room again, except it was filled with swirling green flames. Aerys's voice mingled with Cersei's, chanting, "Burn them all! Burn them all!" He saw the city engulfed in wildfire, flesh melting, screams echoing. He ran to stop it, but his sword arm was gone, replaced by a phantom limb that wouldn't obey his will. At the last moment, he turned and saw Cersei on the throne, green flames licking at her skirts. She held out her hand to him, silently pleading. He tried to reach her, but she vanished in an explosion of emerald fire. He bolted awake in the early hours before dawn, cold sweat drenching his brow. He lay there, breathing heavily, eyes staring at the ceiling. Morning light crept in and he forced himself to rise. Outside, the day's bustle began anew. He reattached his golden hand, rubbed his face, and set his jaw. Another day, another chance to carry this burden, another step away from the ashes of King's Landing. Downstairs, Brienne waited, finishing a simple breakfast of bread and eggs. She offered him a seat and a plate. They ate in companionable silence. The innkeeper gave them curious glances, but asked no questions. Jaime was grateful for the anonymity. He could almost pretend he was just another traveler, unburdened by titles, family, or the ghosts of queens he had killed. Almost. When they set out again, heading north along the King's Road, the weather was mercifully mild. They passed a few merchants on carts carrying wares. Now and then, a traveler stopped to exchange news of the realm. Some had already heard of the Queen's demise and wondered who would rule next. A few spat curses at House Lannister, blaming them for all the wars and strife. Jaime kept his head low, letting his companion do the talking. At midday, they paused at a shrine dedicated to the Seven. Candles burned under the watchful statues, offerings left by weary pilgrims seeking blessings. Jaime hesitated, then dismounted and approached the effigy of the mother, cradling a babe in her arms. He thought of Myrcella, Joffrey, and Tommen, each taken before their time. He thought of how Cersei had once threatened to burn the world if their children were harmed, and how in the end she nearly made good on that threat. Quietly, Jaime knelt before the statue, feeling awkward and exposed. He muttered a prayer for his children, and yes, even for Cersei, that she might find peace beyond his reach. When he rose, he felt no grand absolution, but a tiny, flickering warmth in his chest, as if acknowledging his grief was at least a step toward healing. Brienne watched, respectful and silent. They continued onward. Days turned into a week, the landscape changing from the rolling plains near King's Landing to the more wooded regions of the Riverlands. They passed the burned ruins of old battle sites, testaments to the war's brutality. Jaime's mind drifted often to the precarious balance in the capital. He wondered if a new king or queen had been chosen, or if the realm teetered still on the brink of chaos. He supposed he might never know. A part of him was relieved to be away from it. One evening, they made camp near a slow-moving river. The air was cool, the sky brilliant with stars. They shared a simple meal, Brienne stirring a small pot of stew while Jaime gathered firewood. The scent of pine filled the glade. For a moment, the hardships of the city seemed distant. Jaime wondered if, under different circumstances, he might have lived a life of simpler values, perhaps with a wife and children he could publicly claim. But that had never been his path. He had known only the sword and the twisted love that had bound him to his sister. Brienne cleared her throat, drawing his attention. "Jaime," she said, voice low in the hush of evening. "I'm sorry." He frowned. "For what?" She stirred the stew, her brow furrowed. "For what you've had to do. For what it cost you. I can't pretend to imagine how it feels." He exhaled, gazing at the flames. It feels like I've slit my own throat, if I'm honest. She was everything to me once. Now she's gone and I was the one to end her. I keep wondering if there was another way. Brienne let a moment pass. We can't always see another way. Sometimes the choice isn't between good and bad, but between bad and worse. I know, Jaime murmured, but it doesn't ease the guilt. She nodded. No, I suppose it doesn't. Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant rush of water. After a while, Brienne served the stew and they ate quietly. Jaime found himself grateful for her presence, a steady rock in the swirling tides of his turmoil. He might never have guessed that the gruff, honorable warrior he had once mocked would become one of his most trusted companions. When the fire had burned low and the night deepened, Jaime lay awake on his bedroll, staring at the stars through the branches overhead. Cersei's face hovered in his thoughts, but now the memory carried less raw agony, replaced by a somber acceptance. What was done was done. He had to move forward or be consumed by regret. In the morning, they broke camp early, forging ahead. As they neared the Trident, the weather turned drizzly and the sky remained overcast for days. Mud clung to their boots and the horses trudged wearily. Jaime's mood matched the gray skies, but he kept riding. Brienne hummed softly under her breath, sometimes old ballads or perhaps prayers. Jaime did not ask which. He found the low melody strangely comforting. On the 10th day of their journey, they found themselves at a crossroads in where the Trident split into multiple branches. The inn was bustling with travelers, merchants heading south, hedge knights seeking fortune, even a small group of refugees returning to lands they'd fled during the wars. The din of conversation filled the common room. Jaime and Brienne took a table in a corner, hoping to remain inconspicuous. But word of a tall female warrior and a one-handed knight in fine leathers must have traveled ahead of them. Or perhaps someone recognized Jaime's face. Whispers circled. Jaime felt eyes on him. A burly sellsword at a nearby table leaned over, muttering something to his companion, who cast Jaime a nervous glance. Brienne noticed it too. Her hand drifted near her sword. Before trouble could brew, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. Sir Jaime. It was Podrick Payne, Brienne's loyal squire, weaving through the packed tables with a broad smile of relief. He bowed hastily. My lady, I've been looking for you. Brienne's face lit with surprised warmth. She rose, and Podrick hurried to her, babbling about how he'd gone ahead to secure lodging for her negotiations up north, but heard rumors of the Queen's death. Jaime watched the two reunite, feeling a pang of something close to envy at their uncomplicated bond. It reminded him that loyalty and goodness still existed in this harsh world. They spent the evening speaking with Podrick, who had gathered tidings. Word of Cersei's death had spread far and wide, overshadowed only by rumors that Daenerys Targaryen had landed in Westeros with her dragons. Some banners were flocking to her cause, eager for a fresh start. Others remained in the Lannisters' camp, though that camp seemed fractured without a clear leader. Tyrion Lannister's name arose, though no one seemed sure of his whereabouts. The realm was in flux, as it so often seemed to be. Jaime thought of Tyrion, the brother he had once freed from a death sentence, only to see him vanish across the sea. Was Tyrion with this Targaryen queen? Possibly. The thought brought a ghost of a smile to Jaime's lips. Tyrion might return someday, perhaps in a position of influence if Daenerys succeeded. Jaime had long since learned not to underestimate his younger brother. As the night wore on, the inn's common room emptied. Podrick secured them rooms, and Brienne, exhausted, turned in, leaving Jaime nursing a half-finished ale by the dying fire. A minstrel sang a soft, melancholic tune about lost love and bitter farewells. Jaime found himself reflecting on the bitter farewell he'd forced upon himself and Cersei. His chest tightened. He felt a presence approach and looked up to see a hooded traveler standing nearby, face half hidden. "You're Jaime Lannister," the traveler said quietly, with no malice in the voice. "The one who killed Queen Cersei." Jaime braced himself, his hand falling to his belt knife. "What of it?" The traveler lifted a slender hand in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm. I lost a sister to the Wildfire at the September of Baelor. The traveler's voice trembled. "I just wanted to say thank you for stopping another massacre." Jaime froze, unprepared for gratitude. He didn't know what to say. The traveler bowed their head. "I know it can't bring her back, but at least no other families will have to mourn like mine did." With that, The hooded figure turned and slipped away, leaving Jaime speechless. He stared into the embers of the fire, grappling with a surge of emotion. Perhaps the realm could heal one wound at a time. He wondered if he could do the same. They departed the inn at first light, continuing north. Each mile that put distance between Jaime and King's Landing felt like a step into a new life. He was uncertain what shape that life would take. He would never escape the name Queenslayer, nor the stain of his deeds. But maybe he could do some good in the time he had left, protecting those who could not protect themselves. He thought of Brienne, and how she carried her duty with unflinching resolve. Could he emulate that? Could the man who once threw a child from a tower, who killed his own king and queen, find redemption in service to a greater good? The thought stayed with him as they crossed the wide rivers and rolling plains, as they forded streams and climbed gentle hills. The sky opened up blue and clear some days, gray and brooding others. On the far horizon, the shadow of distant mountains hinted they were nearing the Vale or perhaps the edge of the riverlands. Brienne guided them steadily, knowing the paths well enough. Podrick trailed behind, ever dutiful. One evening, as they made camp beneath a towering oak, Brienne spoke of her intentions to see Sansa Stark in Winterfell. "She's rebuilding," Brienne explained, "but she'll need loyal warriors, good knights who won't betray her. The North's loyalty to House Stark runs deep, yet they're wary of more war." Jaime nodded. "I'm no Stark champion, but I've seen enough war to last a lifetime. If they'll have me, I'll try to help." Podrick smiled at that. "Lady Sansa's a just ruler by all accounts, and she trusts my lady's judgment." Brienne studied Jaime, a hint of a smile on her lips. "Then let's hope she can see what I see. A man trying to atone for his sins." Jaime felt a flush of gratitude. He bowed his head, uncertain how to respond to such kindness. The memory of Cersei still weighed on him, but now there was a glimmer of something else. The possibility that he might shape a different legacy, one not defined solely by betrayal and regicide. They continued on, day by day, the land shifting into the crisp climate of the north. Villages were sparser, the roads less traveled. Occasionally, they passed huntsmen or small groups of travelers heading south before winter fully took hold. Word drifted back that Daenerys Targaryen was indeed making moves, forging alliances with various houses. But to Jaime it felt like distant thunder, a storm that might or might not come for him. His focus was on the road ahead and the flicker of redemption he dared to hope for. As they rode, he sometimes recalled the first time he had left King's Landing after killing Aerys. Then he had been a young man, bitter and scorned, wearing the white cloak of the King's Guard. Now he was older, missing a hand, his sister's blood staining his soul. But he was also, in some small way, freer. The world was no less cruel, but perhaps he had grown wiser. Perhaps the choices he made henceforth could honor the better parts of himself. When at last the towering walls of Winterfell came into view, Jaime felt a swirl of apprehension and resolve. Brienne informed him that the lady of the castle, Sansa Stark, would at least grant them an audience. Whether or not she would accept Jaime remained to be seen. But he would face her judgment come what may. They rode under the portcullis, the courtyard bustling with activity. Stable hands hurried to take their horses. Soldiers in Stark livery eyed them curiously. Brienne introduced herself, Podrick, and Jaime to a steward who promised to bring word to the Lady of Winterfell. In the meantime, they were shown modest quarters in the gatehouse tower. Jaime was content to wait, his nerves taut, his mind brimming with thoughts of how Sansa had suffered at the hands of the Lannisters, how her father had been executed at King Joffrey's command, how the entire Stark family had been torn apart. Would she ever forgive a Lannister in her halls, let alone the one who had killed her queen? Even if it had been to save the city? The next day, they stood before Sansa Stark in the great hall, the direwolf banners draped from the rafters. She sat in the Lord's seat, wearing a cloak of gray and white, her red hair a striking contrast. Her expression was poised, cautious. She greeted Brienne warmly, showing gratitude and trust in the tall knight's counsel. Then her gaze settled on Jaime. He inclined his head respectfully. The hall was silent, the weight of 1,000 past wrongs pressing upon them. Sansa's voice was calm when she spoke. "Sir Jaime Lannister, the Queenslayer, twice over. No accusation, just a statement of fact." Jaime bowed. I will not deny it." She regarded him for a moment, assessing. Brienne has told me your reasons. She vouches for your sincerity and that you did it to save thousands of lives. He met her eyes, refusing to flinch. That is the truth, my lady. Sansa looked thoughtful. The truth is rarely simple in Westeros. My father believed in honor and lost his head because of it. I have learned that survival sometimes means doing what seems dishonorable. If you truly seek to atone, if your actions have truly saved the people of King's Landing from another massacre, then you have done a great service. Despite your family's history. Her words were careful, balanced. Jaime felt a stirring of respect for her. She was not the timid girl who had once been betrothed to Joffrey. She was a woman hardened by loss, determined to protect her people. I offer my sword, my counsel, he said. If you'll have me. A long pause. Sansa exchanged a glance with Brienne, who gave a slight nod. Very well, Sansa said at last. You may stay in Winterfell as a guest for now. Show me your worth, Ser Jaime, and I will consider you an ally. Betray my trust, and there will be no mercy. Jaime inclined his head again. Understood. And so, Jaime Lannister began a new chapter of his life in Winterfell. It was not a simple or easy transformation. Many of the Northerners eyed him with contempt, remembering the cruelties of the Lannisters. Rumors abounded about how he had slain his sister, about the reasons behind it, about the sum of his sins. He kept his head low, aided Brienne in training young squires, and offered counsel on fortifications where he could. Gradually, a few people came to see him as more than a lion in wolf's clothing. He was simply a man who bore great guilt and sought to mend what he could. Letters came from the south, speaking of political upheavals, but King's Landing did not burn. The sabotage had worked and the wildfire stashes remained harmless. Occasionally, Jaime would read or hear a rumor that painted him as a monster who murdered his own sister for power, or that he was actually enthroned as king behind the scenes. He ignored them. The truth belonged to him and to the city that had been spared. In time, he developed a tentative friendship with Lady Sansa predicated on mutual respect and the memory of those who had suffered under the Lannisters' cruelty. She recognized, through Brienne's unwavering support of him, that Jaime was not the man he once was. They spoke late at night sometimes, in the library, discussing strategy, the nature of leadership, and the burden of doing terrible things for the greater good. Jaime shared some of what haunted him without dwelling too much on the personal anguish of killing Cersei. Sansa listened quietly, offering neither condemnation nor absolution, but a certain understanding as someone who had learned the realm's harsh lessons. Seasons shifted, crisp autumn turning to cold winter. Snow-blanketed Winterfell muffling the sounds of daily life. Jaime took to wearing thick gloves over his golden hand. He helped Brienne patrol the walls, ensuring the people within were safe from bandits or any other threat. He felt strangely at peace amid the stark beauty of the north, a land so different from the gilded halls of King's Landing. One frigid morning, Jaime awoke early and walked to a secluded courtyard, remembering how he once trained with sword and shield daily. Now, with his missing hand, the movements were clumsy, but he had adapted. He practiced footwork, strikes, parries, ignoring the numbness in his stump where the cold air bit at the metal contraption. The sky was a pale gray, dawn barely lighting the snow-dusted stones. He heard a voice behind him. "You're improving," Brienne said, leaning against a post, arms folded. A hint of admiration shone in her eyes. She had been one of the few who never saw his disability as a weakness, but rather as a challenge to be overcome. He lowered his sword, exhaling a foggy breath. "If I keep it at another decade, I might be half the swordsman I was." Brienne stepped forward, drawing her own blade. "Let's see about that." She gestured for him to attack. They sparred in the cold morning light, blades ringing. Jaime moved slower than in his heyday, but he compensated with cunning and skill gleaned from countless battles. Brienne's strength and precision pushed him, and he found himself smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile. This was how they had bonded once, as unlikely allies forging respect through steel. When they stopped, panting in the icy air, Brienne offered a small grin. "You fight like a man who has something to protect." "I do," Jaime said, surprising himself with the realization. "This place. These people. The idea that maybe I can leave something good behind, for once." She nodded, sheathing her sword. Together, they walked across the courtyard. Snow crunched underfoot and the silence of winter enveloped them. Jaime felt a quiet gratitude. He remembered the day he had plunged his blade into Cersei's chest, the day he had chosen the fate of thousands over his own love. That choice had shattered him, but also set him free. Now he stood in Winterfell, forging a path he never thought possible. In that moment, he saw an image in his mind: King's Landing at dusk, untouched by green flames, spared the fate of becoming another scorched ruin. He saw children running through cobbled streets, merchants plying their trade, and bells tolling for the living rather than the dead. He had once again prevented Burn Them All from becoming a reality. The city lived, and so did he, though in a sense he had died that day with Cersei. Yet here he was, forging onward. Perhaps in time, stories would be told of the Kingslayer who slew his queen to save 1,000,000 souls, or perhaps he would be remembered simply as the man who chose duty over love. But the deeper truth was more complex, known only to him. He carried it in his heart alongside the memory of a sister he could not save from her own darkness. And in the hush of Winterfell, the bright spark of redemption seemed possible if only he had the courage to keep walking toward it. So Jaime Lannister pressed on through the north's snowy expanse, standing guard on the battlements in the chilly moonlight, training with Brienne at dawn, sharing cautious words with Lady Sansa by the hearth. Each day he rose with the knowledge of his past crimes and the faint hope that his future might be measured not in titles or conquests, but in small acts of honor. It was a slow, deliberate path, one he could never have imagined during his years as the Golden Knight of the King's Guard or as Cersei's devoted protector. But it was the only path left for him, the only one that made sense in a realm where so much had been lost. The snow continued to fall, each flake unique, silent, and pure. Jaime sometimes closed his eyes, letting the cold sting his face, imagining it washing away the blood on his hands. But there was no true washing away. He knew that. Redemption, if it existed, would be found in living with the pain, in using it to guide his actions. And so he lived day by day in the quiet, stony halls of Winterfell, forging alliances and respect he never thought he'd earn. He had become a Queenslayer, yet in so doing, he had become something else entirely, a man who chose to save a city, and perhaps, in the end, to save himself. Jaime awoke before dawn, leaving the comfort of his straw-stuffed mattress to dress in the hush of early morning. The weight of the north's chill pressed through the small window in his chamber, and the stale taste of sleep clung to his mouth. He splashed water onto his face, suppressing a shiver as it trickled down his neck. Pausing before the small mirror, he rubbed at the faint lines bracketing his eyes. That face sometimes felt like a stranger's, older, worn, and haunted by memories he had tried to outrun. Yet here he stood, in Winterfell of all places, forging a life he could never have predicted. He attached his golden hand, testing the leather straps that bound it to his stump. The contraption still felt foreign, no matter how many times he used it. It reminded him of the Red Keep, of Qyburn's fateful experiments, of nights spent clinging to illusions that had shattered when he thrust a sword into Cersei's chest. In fleeting moments of half-waking dreams, he felt the weight of her body collapsing into his arms. Some nights he dreamed of her voice. Always he woke with the taste of ash in his throat. Light bled into the corridor when he stepped out. Winterfell was all hush and heavy stone, the sense of age exuding from each worn gray block. He had grown used to these halls, though at times he felt like an intruder in a house where the ghosts of the past walked alongside the living. Still, Lady Sansa had accepted him here, however tentatively, trusting in Brienne's word and her own measured judgment. He intended to prove himself worthy of that trust. At this hour, the great hall was near empty, the tables draped in shadows. A single candle burned at one of the far trestles, revealing a tired steward scribbling into a ledger. Jaime took a few measured steps on the cold flagstones, nodding to the man, and then continued outside into the courtyard. Icy air greeted him, biting the inside of his lungs. Snow had fallen in the night. A crisp sheet of white covered the grounds. The morning sky was a bleak gray, and the bare trees stood like silent sentinels near the walls. He caught sight of Brienne across the yard, a tall figure with her fur-lined cloak pulled tight. She was drilling a pair of the younger guards, each armed with blunted practice swords. Their strikes echoed, dull thuds against wood. Nearby, Podrick Payne looked on, occasionally offering suggestions that died in the wind before they reached Jaime's ears. Jaime felt a faint stir of warmth in his chest. Brienne had slipped into her role here like a hand in a glove, instructing these men with the same unyielding discipline that she had once employed to teach Podrick. She set high standards but never mocked an earnest effort, and the guards seemed to respect her for it. Despite the North's general wariness toward outsiders, Brienne's calm authority and proven loyalty to Lady Sansa had earned her a place of value, as well as a grudging admiration from more than a few soldiers. Jaime approached, boots crunching on the packed snow. One of the guards saw him and faltered, which earned him a sharp rap on the wrist from Brienne's practiced sword. When the young man hissed in pain, she turned, following his gaze. Her blue eyes settled on Jaime, and a small, Nearly imperceptible smile touched the corners of her mouth. "You're late," she said. "Couldn't sleep?" "I slept enough," Jaime replied. He shrugged, adjusting his golden hand as though warding off a chill. "But you know me. I never could resist a good morning spar. Let's see if you've kept up your training," she answered, cocking her head. "You're looking a shade better than when we left King's Landing, at least." Jaime mustered a smirk. "I only glow with health when I'm breathing the freezing air of the north." She handed him a blunted steel blade, then waved the young guards off. Podrick joined them, stepping forward with a hopeful grin. "Do you need me to stand aside, Ser Jaime, or shall I help you warm up?" Jaime arched an eyebrow. "You've grown bold, Pod. I'm not sure if that's Brienne's doing or Winterfell's." Podrick gave a lopsided grin. "I learn wherever I can." Still, he kept a respectful distance. He knew better than to interrupt when Jaime and Brienne locked blades. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond forged on muddy roads and in the face of threats that tested every ounce of their mettle. Jaime lifted the practice sword, feeling its balance. His left hand still wasn't the hand he'd been born to use, but he had adapted. The reflexes he'd once owned as the best swordsman in the realm were tempered by the knowledge that his body was no longer that of the brash youth he had been. Perhaps he had become more cunning because of it, or so he liked to tell himself. He and Brienne circled each other, boots scraping on snow and frozen gravel, her sword angled high, the point drifting toward his face. He flicked his gaze to her stance, remembering the pattern of her movements. She struck first with a measured sweep aimed at his ribs. He parried with a twist of his wrist, wincing slightly at the jolt through his stump. The blades met with a sharp clang. They exchanged half a dozen blows in quick succession, the ring of steel resonating around the courtyard. Jaime sidestepped, pivoting to gain an advantageous angle, but Brienne was agile, stepping forward to jab at his chest. He deflected, only to find her next strike already whistling toward his thigh. He hopped back, panting a little, and she pressed. Though they used blunted swords, her hits carried enough force to leave bruises if they landed squarely. Jaime felt sweat forming beneath his layers of fur and wool. After a rapid exchange, Jaime feigned a high slash, drawing her guard up, then aimed low. But Brienne anticipated him, bringing her steel down in a deft block. The clang rattled his bones. She twisted her blade, hooking his sword in a way that nearly tore it from his grip. Jaime yanked free, staggering. He tried to lunge inward for a grappling move, but her shoulder rammed his chest, knocking him onto the packed snow. He landed with a grunt, cursing as his golden hand caught awkwardly against his side. Podrick started forward, concern on his face, but Jaime just wheezed in annoyance. He felt a surge of frustration and pride warring within him. Brienne lowered her blade, breathing heavily. "You okay?" she asked, stretching out a hand. Jaime glowered half-heartedly. "I was a better fighter when I had two good hands," he said, not quite a complaint, more a resigned acceptance of reality. But he took her offered hand and let her pull him up. "You're still better than most men out here," Brienne replied softly. "But you rely on old habits. If your feint is obvious, I'm going to read it every time." She clapped him lightly on the shoulder before stepping back. Podrick coughed. "At least you put up a good fight, Ser Jaime." He snorted, brushing slush from his breeches. "Small consolation, Pod, but I'll accept it." The courtyard had grown busier. A few of the passing soldiers watched, though none were foolish enough to laugh. Whatever else he was, Jaime Lannister was known to carry a dangerous edge, and he doubted any of them wanted that edge turned on them. Especially not after all the rumors swirling about how he had killed his own sister to save King's Landing. "Again?" Brienne asked, raising her practice sword and setting her stance. But Jaime shook his head. "Later," he told her. "I want my breakfast and the day's chores won't wait." He returned the training sword to the rack. "You've improved in any case." You parried that overhead slash without even blinking. She nodded, expression unreadable. "I owe that to practicing every day, which is something certain knights ought to do more of." Her mild teasing coaxed the faintest flicker of a grin from him. He turned to see Podrick rounding up the younger guards, presumably to resume their own drills. Another swirl of memories touched Jaime, memories of the boy Podrick had once been, the shy squire who rarely spoke above a mumble. Now he seemed more confident, though still sweet-faced and earnest. It was odd how time and hardship had carved them all into different shapes. Jaime's stomach rumbled. He left the yard, passing by rows of stables where steam rose from the horses' nostrils. As he approached the great hall, the rich smell of broth and oats reached him. It reminded him of how different Winterfell cuisine was from the courtly feasts of King's Landing. The north had its heavy stews, black bread, and salted meats. He'd grown accustomed to it. Honestly, he sometimes found it more satisfying than the elaborate dishes of the south. Inside, the warmth of the hall's hearth enveloped him. A pair of dogs wandered near the fireside, hoping for scraps. Servants were ladling breakfast into wooden bowls for soldiers and retainers. The hush of dawn had given way to a muted bustle. Jaime collected a bowl, nodding politely to the kitchen staff, then found a seat near the far wall. The stew was thick, containing bits of onion and turnip, small morsels of venison. He savored it, feeling the heat bloom in his belly. Every sip was a comfort after sparring in the cold. Not long after, a few of the Stark household guard filed in, followed by a man wearing the sigil of House Serwyn, his cloak damp with melted snow. They kept their distance from Jaime, offering only polite nods. Sometimes he still saw a flicker of apprehension in their eyes. In the quiet, he heard them discussing rumor after rumor that Daenerys Targaryen's armies were on the march, that a strange sickness had broken out in the Reach, that the Ironborn were raiding remote coastlines again. Winterfell's corridors carried tales from all corners of the realm. Jaime wondered about those rumors. Ever since Cersei's death, the Seven Kingdoms had been in a state of anxious flux. The Iron Throne was empty, at least in Eerie. Some rumored that Daenerys would soon make her bid official, others said she was content to gather allies first. And as for King's Landing itself, word had come months prior that a provisional council of lords and advisors was holding the capital in uneasy stewardship. How stable that arrangement might be, Jaime had no idea. He had not set foot there since he'd ridden away with Brienne, leaving behind the ashes of his old life. A scraping of the bench across from him drew his attention. Brienne had entered and set her bowl down, pushing stray locks of blonde hair from her brow. She seldom wore it long these days. The north's frigid air made her prefer something more easily tucked under a cloak or helm. She lifted her gaze to meet his. They needed no preamble. They had grown used to sharing quiet meals like this, peppered with sporadic conversation. He broke the silence first. "I might need to speak with Lady Sansa soon," he said. "I've heard talk that refugees from the Riverlands are heading here, fleeing some skirmishes. Apparently, some disorganized remnants of the Lannister loyalists have turned to banditry." He pursed his lips, uneasy. The idea of Lannister men turned brigands in the Riverlands only deepened his lingering guilt. He couldn't help thinking of the last time he'd ridden through that region, seeing the devastation left by years of war. Now, with no true leadership in the West, pieces of House Lannister's broken alliances had fractured into lawlessness. Brienne nodded, sipping from her bowl. "I heard the same. The Riverlands have known no rest for a long while. Even after the war ended, it seems the scars run deep." She drummed her fingers on the table, gazed distant for a moment. "I'll ride out if need be. Lady Sansa might wish to send some armed escort to protect these refugees." He fiddled with his golden hand, turning it slightly to catch the torchlight. "I could go with you. They might be more inclined to lay down arms if they see me, a Lannister, approaching under Stark colors." He snorted at the irony. "Though they might also shoot me on sight, thinking I'm a traitor to my own house." Brienne offered a crooked smile. "We'll do what we must. Lady Sansa is wise enough to recognize that dealing with these stragglers swiftly and fairly will prevent chaos later." He grunted. True enough. They finished their meal quietly. Outside, the sky brightened to a thin, wintry blue. Jaime rose, bid Brienne a short farewell, and ventured deeper into the keep. He passed the old library where Sansa often spent her mornings in discussion with her steward or poring over ancient records to manage the North's resources. She was there now, seated at a broad wooden table. Stacks of parchment, half-burned candles, and open ledgers covered the surface. The tall windows admitted ghostly daylight, illuminating the dust motes that drifted around her auburn hair. When Jaime reached the threshold, he paused, uncertain if he should disturb her. She noticed him anyway, lifting her gaze with a faint smile. Her eyes were tired but resolute. "Sir Jaime," she greeted. Her voice retained a certain politeness, but its undercurrent was one of acceptance and a hint of warmth. Time had tempered the distrust that once weighed heavily between them, though he sensed she would never truly forget House Stark's tragedies at the Lannisters' hands. He inclined his head respectfully. "My lady, I hope to discuss the rumors of refugees heading north." She placed her quill aside, leaving a faint blot of ink on the parchment. "Yes, I've been hearing about them. Some have already reached the villages south of Winterfell, exhausted, hungry. They speak of roving bands who demand tolls or outright attack travelers on the roads." Jaime approached the table, letting the door close behind him. The library smelled of vellum and dust, layered with the faint scent of beeswax from the candles. Brienne and I were considering riding out to assess the situation. I can speak to any men who used to claim loyalty to House Lannister. He forced a thin smile. Or at least try. If they're brigands, they might not listen to reason. Sansa leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. We cannot allow chaos to creep into the north. These roads need to remain safe, especially as winter deepens. She contemplated for a moment, gaze flicking to her steward who lingered near the shelves. Very well. Gather a small company and see what's happening. If the bandits yield, bring them in peacefully. If not, you are authorized to defend the refugees by any means necessary. He nodded. I'll try to avoid bloodshed, but I'll not let them prey on innocent people. Her eyes were cool, unwavering. That's all I can ask, Sir Jaime. We have enough ghosts in these halls. I'd prefer not to add the blood of the desperate if it can be avoided. He knew exactly what she meant. During the wars, so many men had simply tried to survive, turning to looting and pillage when they saw no other choice. But that did not excuse it. Too many families had already suffered. Jaime vowed to do better than he had in the past, remembering those days of arrogance and blind loyalty to a cause that had brought only devastation to the Riverlands. He remembered the columns of smoke rising over farmland, the ghosts of the corpses left in shallow graves. Sansa's voice drew him from his reverie. You and Brienne make a strong team, she said. Between her unwavering sense of justice and your understanding of these men's mindset, I trust you'll find the best path. He dipped his head. We'll leave within 2 days. I'll gather supplies and a handful of dependable soldiers. Safe travels then, Sansa said, picking her quill back up. Return with news as soon as you can. He departed with a sense of purpose coalescing in his chest. Over the past moons, he had slowly, haltingly found ways to repay his debt to this new life. He helped plan fortifications, he patrolled the roads, he lent his sword arm, inelegant as it was, to keep the peace. This would be another step, a chance to prove he was more than the man he'd once been. True to his word, 2 days later found Jaime atop a chestnut mare, draped in a heavy cloak to ward off the biting cold. Snow still dusted the courtyard, and the sky promised more to come. Beside him, Brienne readied her steed, a sturdy bay gelding with a white blaze. Podrick mounted up behind them, his expression solemn as a few other soldiers joined the small column. All told, they were a mere dozen, but each one had been hand-picked for reliability rather than sheer numbers. Jaime exchanged a last nod with the gate guards, who wished them good fortune. The portcullis rattled upward, revealing the white expanse beyond Winterfell's walls. A stiff wind carried the promise of a bitter day. Jaime let out a breath, gathered his reins, and urged his horse forward. They started down the King's Road, the hooves of their mounts crunching in the crusted snow, the sullen hush of winter bearing witness to their departure. In the early miles, the landscape spread wide under a pale sky. Stands of leafless trees flanked the road, their branches black and skeletal. Drifts of snow gathered in hollows, crows circled overhead, their distant caws echoing across the lonely fields. Jaime pulled his cloak tighter, feeling the sting of the wind on his cheeks. These northern roads were a far cry from the sun-baked highways he had once traversed near Highgarden or the dusty tracks of Dorne. Podrick pulled up alongside Brienne, who kept a steady pace, scanning the horizon. My lady, he ventured, the refugees, do you think they'll trust us? They might fear all armed men. Brienne's gaze remained forward, but she answered, we have provisions and an offer of sanctuary. If they fear us, we'll try to show them we mean no harm. Her breath came in small puffs of vapor. Our real concern is those bandits. We'll see if they're scattered deserters from some army or genuine criminals. Jaime listened, only half attending. The rhythm of his horse's stride lulled him into introspection. Each time he rode out on a mission like this, he remembered how he'd once ridden under the Lannister banner, arrogant and sure of his cause. Now he ventured forth in a humbler capacity, striving to mend what his family name had shattered. He never voiced these thoughts aloud. They were an internal reckoning. They made camp the first night by a frozen creek where the wind scoured the plain and the pines offered faint shelter. One of the soldiers from Winterfell, Ser Gedrick, a quiet man with a thick beard, gathered fallen branches to feed the fire. Podrick set about boiling water for a thin stew. Brienne and Jaime walked the perimeter, verifying there was no sign of travelers or lurking threats. The hush of the night pressed down. Without the constant hum of city life or castle corridors, Jaime's ears seemed to ring with the emptiness. Somewhere in the far distance, a lone wolf howled. Jaime paused, tilting his head, listening to the long, mournful cry. The haunting note sent a chill down his back. I'll take first watch, Brienne murmured, stamping her feet against the cold. Get some rest if you can. Jaime offered a nod. Wake me for the second shift. They returned to the fire. The stew was hot but watery, bits of salt beef and onion bobbing to the surface. Jaime ate in silence, feeling the weight of the day settle in his limbs. The journey itself was hardly remarkable, but the tension of not knowing what they'd find still gnawed at him. He recalled the traveler he had met in that inn months ago, the one who thanked him for stopping another wildfire catastrophe. That moment underscored how his life had changed. He was no hero, but he had done something to prevent a greater horror. Now, maybe he could continue doing things that made a difference, even if they never fully washed away the blood of his past. After the meal, Jaime rolled out his bedroll near the fire, the flames painting flickering patterns on the snowy ground. He tugged his cloak around him and stared at the sparks dancing upward into the starless sky. Eventually, he managed to drift off, lulled by the crackle of burning pine. Sometime in the deep hours of night, he felt Brienne's boot nudge his shoulder. "Your turn," she whispered. He struggled awake, rubbed sleep from his eyes, and rose to relieve her. The camp was still, the soldiers curled in their bedrolls, huddling against the cold. Brienne gave him a tired nod and settled in by the fire. Jaime paced a slow circle around the camp's perimeter. His breath puffed white in front of his face. The moon was hidden, leaving the world in a thick darkness occasionally broken by the glow of the campfire. Snow crunched beneath his boots with each step. He found a fallen log to lean against, facing the open plain. The night pressed heavily on him, and again that faint sense of isolation nipped at him. He'd grown up in the sunlit halls of Casterly Rock, then spent years in the Red Keep's labyrinth. These wide northern vistas still felt foreign, as though he stood at the edge of a world too large for him to grasp. He thought of Cersei. Sometimes, in the hush of the darkest hours, he imagined she was near. He couldn't escape the memory of her final breath, the startled betrayal in her eyes. A part of him still questioned whether he could have saved her from that path of madness, or whether he had merely put an end to what she'd become. His mind circled back to that same torment, night after night. Reason told him she had left him no choice. Still, remorse lingered like a dull ache that never fully subsided. Yet each time he started down that spiral, he forced himself to remember the thousands of lives spared. The burning city that never came to be. The ghostly images of children not turned to ash. That was the reason. Duty, necessity, love, twisted as it was. And so he endured his guilt in silence. He exhaled, letting the night air sting his lungs, and eventually the eastern horizon began to lighten, a promise of dawn creeping into the sky. When morning came, they doused the fire and packed their gear. The second day's ride proved uneventful, the cold intensifying. Jaime's ears stung beneath his hood, and each exhalation formed a small cloud. By midday, they spotted a broken cart alongside the road, its wheels torn off. Jaime dismounted to investigate, Brienne at his side. The cart's bed was splattered with old blood, partially frozen. No sign of the owner or any bodies, just a few stray footprints in the snow. "They've been gone a few days," Brienne said, crouching to study the tracks. "This might be the work of those bandits, or it might just be wolves. Hard to say." Jaime nudged the cart's splintered frame with his foot. "No goods left, whatever was here was stolen or taken. The blood suggests someone was hurt or killed." He felt a simmer of anger beneath his calm. The realm was still so broken, so violent. How many times had he contributed to that chaos in the past? They pressed on. By late afternoon, they reached a small hamlet, where a few cottages clustered around a frozen well. Smoke drifted from a handful of chimneys. The villagers stared warily from shuttered windows, untrusting of armed men. Jaime and Brienne approached on horseback, one soldier behind them carrying a stark banner to signal their allegiance. An old woman peeked out from behind a door, hollering something about leaving them in peace. Jaime dismounted, raising both hands in a gesture of calm. "We mean you no harm," he called. "We're here on behalf of Lady Sansa Stark, wanting to learn if any travelers passed through." A thin man wearing a patched cloak shuffled outside, leaning on a walking stick. He eyed them with suspicion. "We've seen no travelers in these parts, only misfortune." "Who are you?" "Jaime Lannister," he said, his voice carrying authority, though the name still brought a hush to the cluster of villagers that gathered. Some recognized it, their faces turning ashen. "We're here to protect folks from bandits. We've heard rumors that brigands roam these roads. Do you know anything?" Another hush, broken by a tremulous voice from a younger woman cradling a toddler. "A group of men came through last week," she said. They demanded food. We barely had enough for ourselves. When we told them that, one of them struck my father. They took what we had anyway. Grain, salted fish. Her gaze flicked to her child, who hid his face in her scarf. They said they'd return if we didn't bring more next time. Brienne looked to Jaime, setting her jaw. Did they wear any colors or sigils? The woman shook her head. Not that I saw. They said they were loyal soldiers, but we didn't recognize their banners. They had rough ways. She swallowed. I heard one mention Lannister gold, but that might have just been a jest. The old man with the walking stick spat on the ground. Bastards, he muttered. Doubt they were real knights. Just scum with swords. Jaime felt a twinge in his chest. He nodded, trying not to let the tension show on his face. We appreciate the information. Lady Sansa will make sure they don't trouble you again if we can find them. We'll leave you some supplies. He gestured to one of his soldiers who fetched a small sack of grain and some salted mutton, leaving it by the well. Though their own provisions were limited, Sansa had insisted they share what they could with any villages in need. The villagers watched with cautious gratitude. Before they departed, Jaime gleaned one more crucial detail. Those men had headed southwest, presumably toward a larger crossroads. He conferred with Brienne, deciding they would track that route. So they set off again, hearts heavy with the knowledge that these bandits were more than a rumor. They followed a faint trail through sparse woodland, occasionally spotting footprints or half-buried horse droppings in the snow. By dusk, they glimpsed a thin wisp of smoke rising beyond a copse of pine. Jaime's senses prickled. He signaled the soldiers to slow, dismounting quietly. Brienne joined him, her hand on her sword hilt. They crept forward through the brittle undergrowth. Soon, they spotted a makeshift camp nestled in a small hollow. Half a dozen men lounged around a low fire. A single horse was tethered to a nearby sapling. The flicker of flames revealed dirty tabards and battered armor. One man wore a moth-eaten cloak that might once have been crimson. They were laughing, passing a skin of wine back and forth. Jaime's stomach churned as he observed them. He recognized a certain swagger in how they slouched, men who had once been soldiers but had lost any semblance of discipline. A battered shield rested against a tree trunk, and though the sigil was obscured, the shape of a roaring lion was still faintly visible beneath the grime. Brienne leaned in, whispering, "Do you think they truly served House Lannister once?" Jaime frowned. "Possibly. Or they might have found that shield somewhere. Either way, we'll handle it." He glanced over his shoulder at the men from Winterfell who approached quietly with drawn bows, stepping gingerly to avoid crunching snow. Podrick was among them, face tense with determination. Jaime took a breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped out from the tree line, calling in a firm voice, "Lay down your weapons." The startled group scrambled upright, reaching for swords. Torchlight danced across their rough features. One man, scrawny with a patchy beard, barked a laugh. "Who the bloody hell are you?" Then he peered closer, and confusion sparked in his eyes. "Seven hells, is that Jaime Lannister?" Jaime's voice carried calm menace. "The same. I suggest you comply before you all regret it. We're here by order of Lady Stark to bring you in or see you brought to justice." They hesitated, some flicking uncertain looks at each other. Then another man, stocky and sneering, snarled, "You kill your own kin, and now you think you can order us around? I heard about you, Queenslayer. Traitor." He spat. "We used to fight for your lot. Now you show up wearing Stark colors." Brienne stepped forward, sword half-drawn. Arrows from Jaime's archers gleamed in the firelight, pointed at the bandits. "Surrender," she snapped. "We have no wish to kill you unless you force our hand." Her tone was enough to unsettle a few of them. Jaime saw them exchange nervous glances, noting the steel in Brienne's posture and the small line of archers behind them. But the stocky man stepped defiantly into the circle of firelight. "We're not going back to starve in some hole. The war's over and we got nothing to show but scars and empty bellies." Jaime's stomach twisted. He recognized the desperation in the man's eyes. This was the ugly aftermath of battles fought at the realm's fringes. Soldiers turned brigands, men who had lost everything and saw no other recourse. "You can come with us to Winterfell," Jaime said, keeping his tone measured. "You'll be tried, but there's a chance for mercy if you haven't spilled too much innocent blood." The man spat again, knuckles whitening around his sword hilt. "I'm not bowing to the Starks or to you." He gestured at his companions. "We're free men now. We'll find our own way." Brienne advanced another step, her blade fully drawn. The steel glinted and her gaze was hard. "You've attacked villages, robbed them? Do you think that will stand?" The scrawny man's eyes darted between Jaime and Brienne, then to the archers. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, or perhaps it was melted snow. "You're outnumbered. I count maybe 6 of you besides that big wench. Brienne's lips tightened. Jaime felt a flare of anger. She might have endured that insult from others, but he would not. Watch your tongue, he snapped, or it'll be the last thing you say. A tense silence followed. One of the men dropped his sword, arms trembling, clearly preferring to live another day. But the stocky leader cursed and swung at Jaime with a sudden wild strike. Jaime pivoted, blocking with the edge of his golden hand, then bringing his blade around in a swift riposte. The blow slashed across the man's arm, drawing a spurt of blood. He howled, staggering, but tried to strike again. It clanged off Jaime's sword, sending shockwaves up Jaime's left arm. Anger and instinct guided his next move. He kicked the man's knee, toppling him. As the man fell, Jaime held his sword at his throat. Yield, Jaime ground out. Or die here. The man glared up at him, clutching his bleeding arm. Slowly, the fight bled from his eyes. He let his sword drop. Around them, Brienne had disarmed 2 others, and the archers held the rest at arrow point. Only the crackle of the fire broke the silence. Jaime's chest heaved, heart pounding in his ears. He glanced around, confirming no one else was foolish enough to attack. Tie them up, he ordered, stepping back. His men and Podrick moved swiftly, binding the bandits' wrists while Brienne kicked their weapons out of reach. When it was done, Jaime cast a stony look at the man he'd bested. You could have made it easier on yourself. The captive spat blood on the ground. You'd have us rot in some dungeon. Better that than rampaging across the north, robbing innocent folk. Jaime sheathed his sword with a decisive motion. We'll take you to Winterfell. Whether Lady Sansa gives mercy or not is up to her. Brienne joined him, breathing hard, though her face showed none of the satisfaction that some warriors might display after victory. She simply looked grim. We should see if they've got anything stolen from the villages, she said, scanning the camp. We can return what we can. Jaime nodded, stepping over the makeshift seats and rummaging through sacks. He found stale bread, some salted fish, a small pouch of coins, likely taken from travelers. More concerning was a battered trunk at the edge of the camp, which contained old Lannister surcoats and tattered flags. He stared at the items, a bitter taste filling his mouth. How many men had once marched under those red and gold banners, only to end up like this, desperate scavengers? This was part of the legacy he wore like a chain. They gathered what might be useful or returnable, then stamped out the fire. Brienne organized a makeshift rope line, forcing the captives to walk behind the company's horses. Night pressed in around them, but they had no intention of letting these men slip away. They backtracked to a sheltered area where they could make camp with better defensive positions, the prisoners bound under guard. During the night, Jaime took a turn on watch again. One of the bandits, the scrawny one, shivered in the cold, meeting Jaime's gaze with uncertain eyes. Jaime offered him a waterskin and the man drank in gulps. You think you're saving us? He muttered hoarsely. Jaime frowned. Maybe. If you stand trial in Winterfell, you might live. If you kept this up, you'd either die of the cold or get yourself killed in a fight you can't win. The man gave a rasping cough, trembling beneath his ragged cloak. We were loyal once. Did everything the Lannisters asked, fought for them? Then it all went to hell. You think we had a choice? War leaves a lot of men without choices, Jaime said quietly. He thought of the illusions he once held, the illusions that loyalty to a cause was always righteous. But the war's been over. You could have found honest work. The man let out a bitter chuckle. Honest work where? Fields burnt, villages gone. No one wants to hire a soldier. We tried for a time. Then it was rob or starve. Jaime felt his chest tighten with a familiar pang of regret. He couldn't fix all the damage the realm had endured, but he also couldn't condone men who terrorized innocents. It's not too late to find another path, Jaime said at last. You'll see what Lady Sansa decides. The man lay his head back on the ground, letting out a weary breath. Jaime walked away, discomfort churning in him. The realm was still a mess, with no single ruler to unify people or help them rebuild. If Daenerys Targaryen truly planned to take the throne, perhaps she could bring order, though that was hardly guaranteed. King's Landing sat in a precarious balance, and the north had enough troubles of its own. Jaime stared at the sky where the stars were faint pinpricks through a haze of cloud. He felt an odd mixture of anger and pity for these prisoners. He forced himself not to dwell on it for long. Dawn would come soon enough, and they needed to bring these men back to face justice. They returned to Winterfell after another day's hard ride, the bandits trudging behind, weary and cold. When the sentries at the gate recognized Jaime and Brienne, they quickly let them inside. Soon enough, the prisoners were led away to secure cells under the watchful eyes of the castle guard. Jaime felt a measure of relief, though not triumph. He dismounted, patting his horse's flank, and found himself face to face with Sansa Stark. She'd come out to the courtyard to greet their party. Her keen gaze went from the bound men to Jaime's face. These must be the bandits terrorizing the roads. You found them quickly. Jaime inclined his head, ignoring the ache in his shoulders from the long ride. A few tried to fight. They've surrendered. She studied the captives, her expression revealing neither anger nor sympathy outright, merely a cool assessment. They'll stand trial. If any are redeemable, we'll see what can be done. The rest, she didn't finish her sentence, but the meaning was clear. Consequences would follow. Brienne reported on what they'd learned from the villagers. Sansa listened intently, then thanked them both. I can see you're exhausted. Rest and warm yourselves, and we'll speak further on what to do about the roads. I want to make sure no other such groups are lurking nearby. Jaime dipped his head. Yes, my lady. He hesitated, about to say more, but Sansa had already turned to speak with the steward, instructing him to prepare for a trial on the morrow. Jaime wondered what justice would look like here, whether the bandits might be sent to the wall, or whether they'd face the executioner's sword. It was out of his hands now. He trudged inside, grateful for the warmth rolling from the great hall's hearth. The contrast from the freezing air made his cheeks sting. Servants moved to and fro, carrying trays of hot cider and bread for the new arrivals. Jaime's men dispersed, murmuring thanks. Brienne lingered by Jaime's side, both too tired for conversation. They parted ways near the corridor leading to their chambers. Before retreating to his room, Jaime paused in the hall, staring at a tapestry depicting the Stark sigil, a gray dire wolf running across a field of white. It caught his eye, reminding him how drastically his life had changed. He was a Lannister among wolves, accepted enough to carry out missions on their behalf. Beneath that tapestry hung another, displaying a stylized weirwood tree with a carved face, the emblem of the old gods. Jaime felt a sudden pang of longing for the simpler illusions he had once clung to. But illusions were gone, replaced by the knowledge that the realm was still fractured and in need of men who could do something about it, even men like him. He made his way to his chamber. The room was small and plain compared to what he'd known in King's Landing, but he found it comforting in its simplicity. He removed his cloak and armor, letting them fall onto a wooden stand. Stretching his shoulder, he noted the bruise forming where the bandit's sword had clipped him. He stripped down to a linen undershirt, then sat on the edge of the bed, gingerly unfastening the golden hand. His stump ached in the cold, and the friction of combat had rubbed the skin raw in places. He grimaced, reaching for a small pot of salve a maester had provided. Carefully, he applied it, feeling the sting subside. Weariness tugged at him, mind and body. He lay back, arms folded behind his head, and stared at the rafters. From outside, muffled chatter drifted in, along with the distant barking of hounds. His thoughts meandered. He recalled the anger in that bandit's eyes, the story of war, betrayal, lost opportunities. Then he thought of Cersei, the final moment in which her anger and heartbreak had blended with the madness in her stare. He must have drifted off, for a loud knock woke him. The chamber had grown dark, only the faint glow of a single candle illuminating shadows on the walls. He sat up, disoriented. "Come in," he said, voice husky with sleep. The door creaked open. It was Brienne, still dressed in her traveling leathers, though she'd removed her armor. She hesitated in the doorway. "I wanted to see if you were all right," she said in her typically direct way. "You took a hit on the road." Jaime brushed a hand through his hair, blinking. "A bruise. Nothing more." He managed a slight smile. "Thank you for your concern." She lingered, eyes flicking to the golden hand resting on the table. I can leave if you want to rest." "It's fine," he said, motioning her in. For a moment, silence thickened between them. The hush of the corridor settled as she closed the door behind her. Jaime felt a subtle tension in the air. They rarely visited each other's chambers, mindful of gossip and their own guarded hearts. But tonight, she seemed unwilling to let him slip into solitude. She stood near the small fireplace, arms folded, as though unsure what to say. Finally, she asked, "How did it feel, confronting those men?" knowing they'd once fought under the Lannister banner. He sighed. It felt like seeing the consequences of everything I once helped build. Men who never had a place after the war ended. Soldiers who lost their purpose and turned desperate. He looked away, jaw tightening. I'm trying to do better, but the realm is so large, and my mistakes run deep. Her gaze softened, though her voice remained steady. You can't fix it all. Not alone. And not overnight. I know, he said, but I can at least ensure fewer innocents suffer. He remembered the vow he had made to himself in King's Landing. One day at a time, he would strive to be a different man than the one who once shoved a boy from a window or the one who sat idly by while atrocities occurred in the name of a mad boy king. Brienne took a step closer, shadows dancing on her face. That's why Lady Sansa trusts you. You've proven yourself willing to act. Willing to risk your own safety to protect others. He let out a short laugh, devoid of humor. If you told the Jaime Lannister of years ago that he'd be praised for honor and selflessness, he'd have scoffed in your face. She tilted her head, a faint smile curving her lips. People change. A beat of silence passed, heavy with unspoken things. He noticed the weariness in her posture, the faint circles under her eyes. They had both ridden far. Sleep beckoned, yet neither seemed eager to return to solitude. Over the months, they had formed a closeness that was deeper than mere companionship. Jaime knew he felt it, though he wrestled with the implications. He had once loved only Cersei, consumed by that forbidden bond. But now that chapter had ended in blood. A pang of guilt flickered whenever he admitted his growing affection for Brienne, as if he were betraying a vow or betraying the memory of the sister he had killed. Yet it was also a stark reminder that he was, somehow, still alive and still capable of human feeling. Brienne looked as if she might speak, but then she turned away, heading for the door. Before she reached it, Jaime said quietly, "Stay a moment longer." His voice emerged low, almost a plea. She halted, glancing over her shoulder. He raised his eyes to meet hers. "We've come a long way, haven't we? Since that day on the road to King's Landing when you bested me in combat and I was too proud to admit it." She snorted softly, though warmth lit her gaze. "You were insufferable then. And now I'm only partly insufferable," he replied, managing a teasing note. His eyes slid to the flickering candle and his tone turned somber. "I don't know what the future holds, Brienne. The realm is stirring. Maybe Daenerys Targaryen will challenge for the throne, or maybe the lords will tear each other apart. But if there's any certainty in my life right now, it's that I trust you." Her expression shifted, an emotion flickering that might have been gratitude or something deeper. "I thank you," she said awkwardly. "I trust you as well." The moment hung there, charged. He stood and moved closer, heart-thudding. He could almost see the wheels turning behind her eyes, measuring what was right, what was wise, and how it all tangled with duty. But her posture relaxed just a fraction. The tension in the room hovered between them. His hand, his real hand, slid hesitantly to her shoulder. The linen of her tunic felt rough under his calloused palm. Her breath caught soft. They both knew the risk. Gossip would swirl if they grew too close, tongues wagging about the Kingslayer seducing the Maiden of Tarth. But perhaps after all they had survived, they deserved a moment of quiet closeness, something to remind them they were still human. She lifted her gaze, her blue eyes intense. Then, with the gentleness that belied her strength, she covered his hand with her own. Neither spoke. The flicker of candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls. After a moment, Jaime lowered his head, resting his forehead against hers. It was not quite a kiss, just an intimate hush. A wave of tenderness rose within him, mingled with sorrow for all he had lost and gratitude for what he might still have. In that fragile instant, the corridor outside filled with the echo of footsteps. Someone knocked on a door down the hallway. Brienne exhaled, drawing back. The spell broke, replaced by reality's demands. She squeezed his hand briefly, then slipped away, her voice hushed. "We'll speak more tomorrow." Jaime managed a nod, watching her go. When the door closed, he let out a ragged breath, emotions teetering precariously. In another lifetime, he might have scoffed at the notion that he could care for anyone but Cersei. Yet here he was, heart full of contradictions. Guilt-warred with longing. He set a hand to his temple, feeling a headache stir. That night, he managed only fitful sleep. Dreams flitted in and out, images of the bandit leader's sneer, of Cersei's final gaze, of Brienne's steady eyes. They tangled like threads he could not unravel. He woke in the gray pre-dawn, an ache in his chest. Life in Winterfell continued, the realm spinning forward, oblivious to the turmoil swirling in his mind. A few hours later, he dressed in fresh clothes, simple breeches, a warm tunic, and his thick cloak, and made his way to the courtyard. News spread that Sansa would hold the trial for the captured bandits in the Great Hall. Jaime joined the gathering crowd. The hall was colder than usual, the braziers only partly lit. Winter sunlight fell through the high windows in pale beams. Soldiers stood along the walls, their breath misting. At the far end, Sansa sat in the Lord's chair, flanked by Brienne and several counselors, including Maester Wolkan and the steward who managed daily affairs. A hush spread as the prisoners were brought in. They looked ragged, ropes binding their wrists. A line of guards prodded them forward. Jaime recognized the stocky leader he'd bested, his arm bandaged but stained with blood. The scrawny man kept his head down, avoiding Jaime's gaze. Sansa's clear voice rang out, carrying across the hall. You stand accused of robbery and assault upon defenseless villages. Witnesses have come forth, and you were caught in the act of banditry. Do you deny these crimes? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The stocky man glared, spitting on the floor. We did what we had to do to survive. That's no crime. Or if it is, it's the crime of the realm for leaving us to starve. A flicker of emotion crossed Sansa's face, though her tone remained composed. I am not unsympathetic to those who suffer. But you chose violence, stealing, and harming innocents. Justice demands you answer for that. The scrawny one muttered, How do you plan to punish us? Chop off our heads. Sansa's gaze flicked to Jaime, then to Brienne. Jaime wondered what she was thinking. Did she pity these men, or did she see them as a threat to the fragile peace? After a tense moment, she spoke. The law of the North says those who commit robbery and violence may lose a hand or even their life. But I know many men were left homeless by war. I offer a choice. You can accept service on the wall, or you can face judgment here. A hush. The scrawny man looked aghast. The stocky one snarled, The wall? That's no better than a prison. Sansa's voice rose, carrying authority. The Night's Watch is a chance for redemption. You will be fed, clothed, and given purpose. If you believe that's worse than robbing the helpless, then you choose your fate. The tension mounted. Jaime studied the prisoners, searching for glimpses of acceptance or defiance. One by one, the bandits shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their heads in resignation. The stocky leader's face contorted with bitterness, but as he scanned the armed guards and realized the odds, he let out a low curse. Fine, he spat. We'll take the black. Better than dying like dogs. Sansa nodded to the steward. Then it's decided. Prepare them for the journey north. The rest is between them and the Night's Watch. She then turned her attention to Jaime, addressing him in front of the gathered hall. Sir Jaime, you brought these men in safely, avoiding further bloodshed. For that, I thank you. The roads near Winterfell are more secure now. A flurry of murmurs rippled among the onlookers. Jaime inclined his head, feeling both relief and an odd discomfort at the public gratitude. I did only what was necessary, my lady. Sansa's eyes lingered on him, a faint smile curving her lips. Sometimes that's enough. The hall began to clear as the bandits were led away. Some onlookers dispersed, returning to their daily tasks. Jaime turned to go as well, eager to escape the attention. He caught Brienne's eye, but she was conversing quietly with Podrick. Instead of interrupting, he slipped out a side exit into the courtyard. The sky was overcast again, threatening more snow. Leaning against a cold stone wall, he breathed in, letting the crisp air fill his lungs. His mind replayed the trial. Sansa's sentence was far harsher than some might want, but tempered by mercy. He respected that. A harsh clang of metal echoed from the armory across the yard, a sound that reminded him how war still rumbled under the surface of this kingdom. The realm was far from peace, even if small corners like Winterfell tried to hold onto stability. He felt a presence behind him and glanced back to see Brienne approaching, footsteps careful on the icy ground. She stopped beside him, her expression thoughtful. Sansa is learning to rule with both firmness and compassion, she said. I think she'll be a good leader for the North. Jaime nodded. Agreed. She's grown into something formidable. He paused, studying Brienne's profile. I'm glad they chose the wall rather than a death sentence. She sighed, crossing her arms. So am I. The last thing the North needs is more bloodshed. And the Watch could use able-bodied men, though I question how loyal they'll be up there. Perhaps the cold will remind them that there are worse fates, Jaime said wryly. He cast a glance at Brienne, the memory of last night's near-intimate moment flickering in his mind. You slept well. She gave him a look that suggested she guessed his unspoken question. Well enough. I was thinking about the roads, about how many more groups like them might be lurking. He felt a pang of disappointment that she changed the subject, but forced himself to remain composed. We could scout further, but Lady Sansa might want us here. Word is, more refugees trickle in daily. She nodded, her gaze shifting to a pair of guards hauling new supplies across the courtyard. Yes, I heard the same. Some come from the south, speaking of Daenerys Targaryen's gathering forces near the Crownlands. Others flee the lawlessness in what used to be Lannister territories. Jaime grimaced. My father never imagined House Lannister would collapse into disarray. Tywin had always boasted that a Lannister was worth 10 of any other house. Now, the Lannisters were leaderless, their seat at Casterly Rock overshadowed by debts to the Iron Bank and a vacuum of power after Cersei's fall. He wondered if Tyrion was out there somewhere, playing the Game of Thrones with Daenerys. The thought caused a subdued longing. Tyrion was the only family member left who might not despise him. But he had no idea how to contact him or if Tyrion even wanted contact. Brienne's voice broke his chain of thought. We've done what we can for now. The north is stable enough around Winterfell. Lady Sansa might send out more patrols, but at least these roads are safer. He studied her face. The winter light made her hair seem more golden than usual. Her features held a mixture of resolve and something gentler. You've served Sansa Stark faithfully for a long time, Jaime said. What do you plan to do if the realm tears itself apart over the Iron Throne? Her shoulders rose in a small shrug. I'll remain by her side. The Starks showed me trust and respect I never found elsewhere. I'll repay that trust no matter what shape the realm takes. He considered that, feeling a low ache in his chest. He had no such cause. His house was in ruin. Once he had been the proudest knight of the King's Guard. Now he was a man still searching for purpose. I envy that clarity, he said quietly. I only know I can't go back to King's Landing. But I also know I can't hide here forever. She turned toward him and the look in her eyes was sincere, even tender. You aren't hiding. You're serving. Sansa sees that, the people see that. And if the day comes when we all must decide who to follow, maybe you'll find a cause worth fighting for. He tried to smile. Maybe. He thought about the possibility of Daenerys Targaryen bringing dragons to the north, forging alliances with old foes. He thought of Jon Snow. Another rumor said that the bastard of Winterfell might be more than he seemed, that some whispered he was a Targaryen as well. The realm was full of swirling secrets. Jaime had lived through enough to know how easily a single secret could unravel everything. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the winter wind brushing their cloaks. A sense of closeness settled between them again, though it remained unspoken. Then Brienne cleared her throat, glancing at the armory. I'm due to train some of the younger guards. Care to join me? Jaime rotated his sore shoulder with a grimace. You'd only show me up as usual. She gave him a dry look. Perhaps, but you'll keep them on their toes. A one-handed knight with your skill is a lesson in adaptability. He considered, then nodded. I'll come watch at least. Give them some pointers. They walked together toward the training yard, footprints crunching in the fresh dusting of snow. The day stretched ahead, filled with tasks and routines. Yet Jaime felt a quiet sense of possibility threaded through his usual regrets. Each new dawn at Winterfell offered him another chance to shape himself into someone better, someone who protected the weak instead of serving a tyrant, someone who learned that honor might mean more than just empty vows. As they reached the yard, soldiers were already gathering. Brienne stepped forward, calling them to order, and Jaime lingered at the periphery. He watched her demonstrate a defensive stance, her strong arms holding a practice sword with perfect form. The men followed, some fumbling, some showing promise. Now and then, Jaime interjected with a tip or correction. A sense of calm purpose washed over him. Days turned into weeks. Life at Winterfell settled into a pattern, with Jaime and Brienne patrolling near the fortress, occasionally escorting small groups of refugees to safety. The bandit problem lessened as news spread that Stark forces and the Kingslayer patrolled these lands. Villages slowly breathed easier. Survivors trickled in from the south. Sansa's reputation as a just leader grew, though she had little love for the Game of Thrones. She communicated occasionally with other lords, but no grand alliance formed. In the distance, an unspoken question loomed: what would happen if Daenerys or any other claimant tried to assert authority over the north? One bleak morning, a raven arrived bearing a message from the Vale. It warned of skirmishes near the Bloody Gate, possibly related to outriders loyal to a Targaryen alliance. Sansa studied the letter in private council with Jaime, Brienne, and a handful of trusted advisors. The conversation circled around whether to fortify the eastern approaches or attempt diplomatic contact. In the end, Sansa chose caution. She sent a small party to investigate, hoping to keep the Vale's corridors open for trade. Jaime felt that uneasy swirl in his gut again. an echo of how quickly the realm could collapse back into war if cooler heads did not prevail. Between patrols and council meetings, Jaime spent his afternoons in the library, reading old tomes on northern history or the genealogies of noble houses, trying to better understand the land he now called home. He found the old legends of the Long Night and the Kings of Winter strangely compelling, tales of dire wolves and white walkers that once terrorized the realm. He sometimes caught himself lingering over accounts of Targaryen conquests, remembering how once House Lannister bent the knee to Aegon the Conqueror. Now, centuries later, a new Targaryen threatened to reclaim the throne. History seemed to move in cycles. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of Arya Stark, the younger sister, roaming the courtyard like a silent shadow. She seldom spoke to him, but her sharp gaze and graceful movements intrigued him. Rumor had it she was a lethal fighter in her own right, adept at the sword, the dagger, and perhaps more. Winterfell whispered that she had traveled far and learned dark arts, though no one confirmed the stories outright. Jaime inclined to believe some of the tales when he saw how menacingly she could appear out of nowhere, her footsteps almost soundless on stone. One brisk evening, Jaime sat by the great hall's hearth, staring into the flames, lost in thought. Most of the castle had turned in for the night. The hush of Winterfell's corridors pressed in. He started when a low voice spoke behind him. "You look troubled, Lannister." He swiveled on the bench to see Arya standing there, arms folded, head tilted in curiosity. She wore dark leathers, a fur-lined cloak thrown over her shoulders. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes cool. Jaime quickly schooled his own expression. "I'm not troubled," he answered, though he doubted she believed it. "Merely thinking." She moved closer, the firelight dancing in her pupils. "That's not something I'd have expected you to do a few years back." He huffed a small laugh. "Nor would I, but times change." Her gaze flicked to the golden hand resting on his thigh. "I used to have a list of names," she said abruptly, voice so low he almost missed it. "Men I intended to kill. Your name was once on it." A chill ran down Jaime's spine, though he kept his face neutral. "Should I be worried you'll add me back?" She studied him for a heartbeat. "I saw you kill Cersei, and I heard why. I watched how you've served my sister. The world isn't as simple as I once believed." She paused. "I'm not the same girl who made that list." Jaime breathed out, nodding slowly. "I'm relieved to hear it." She gave a dry, humorless smile. "You should be." Then she glanced at the flames, something haunted flickering in her eyes. "I learned that revenge doesn't end suffering. It just keeps it spinning." He couldn't argue with that. He thought of the cyclical revenge that had consumed House Lannister and its enemies, how it ended with blood and ruin. "Wisdom beyond your years," he said softly. She shrugged, stepping back. "Wisdom costs. I just wanted to see for myself how much you've changed." Her gaze pinned him. "Don't betray my sister. If you do, I'll kill you without hesitation. You won't see me coming." The lethal certainty in her tone made Jaime's pulse quicken, but he also respected her directness. He didn't flinch. "I won't betray her. Or you." She nodded once, turning on her heel. "Good." With that, she vanished into the shadows, silent as a wraith. Jaime let out a long breath, running his hand through his hair. Another reminder that trust here was fragile, but it was trust he intended to keep. As winter deepened, rumors reached Winterfell that Daenerys Targaryen had indeed landed in Dragonstone and was making overtures to various lords, including in the Reach and the Stormlands. The small council in King's Landing supposedly teetered, uncertain whether to rally behind the Targaryen queen or attempt to crown a new king from among the remaining great houses. The realm braced for another potential conflict, one that could either unify the Seven Kingdoms under a new banner or shatter them once more. Sansa Stark began receiving letters from certain southern houses, inquiring about an alliance or at least neutrality if Daenerys marched north. One day she summoned Jaime and Brienne to her solar. The room was modestly furnished, warmed by a blazing hearth. She held a parchment in her hands, bearing a broken seal. She gave Jaime a thoughtful look. "It seems the Tarleys of Horn Hill might pledge support to Daenerys. They've asked me to consider opening the King's Road for Targaryen forces traveling north." Brienne frowned. "That would be a dangerous acceptance, my lady. We don't know Daenerys' intentions toward the north. Her father was the Mad King, Jaime felt a rush of old memories, the day he slew that king to stop the city's destruction. Daenerys may not be her father, he said carefully. But we can't be certain. She's rumored to have dragons. That alone is enough to worry any realm. Sansa's expression remained steady. We don't seek war, but nor will we roll out a welcome for an army that might demand our submission. The North remembers too many broken promises from the South. Jaime considered his words. If Daenerys' aim is to retake the Iron Throne, she'll need to bring the other kingdoms to heel or win them over. She might view the North as either a potential ally or a rebellious province. Sansa tapped the parchment lightly, eyes distant. If she's as wise as some claim, perhaps she'll respect our independence. But I doubt that. We've been through too much to surrender what my brother and I have fought to reclaim. She paused, exhaling. I'll craft a diplomatic response for now. We can't close the roads entirely, trade must flow. But we won't openly invite her armies. Brienne nodded, looking relieved that Sansa was choosing a cautious path. Jaime remained silent, thinking of how precarious everything was. If the Targaryen queen came north with her dragons, how would Winterfell hold out even with its thick walls and stout hearts? Dragonfire could melt stone. And if Daenerys was anything like her father, the consequences could be dire. When the meeting ended, Jaime stepped out into the corridor with Brienne. She glanced at him, expression pensive. Do you think she'll come here in force? Jaime shrugged. Possibly. If she wants the realm united, she can't ignore the North. And if word reaches her that I'm here, he trailed off, remembering that Tyrion was rumored to be her hand or close advisor. Would Tyrion counsel her to show mercy or demand retribution? Jaime couldn't guess. They walked in thoughtful silence. If she does come, Brienne said quietly, the North won't yield easily. We'll defend Winterfell, and Lady Sansa will expect our loyalty. Jaime stopped, turning to face her. I owe Lady Sansa more than I can say. She gave me a home when I had none. If it comes to conflict, I'll fight at her side. He meant it. Though he disliked the idea of raising a sword against any potential queen, loyalty was not a concept he took lightly anymore. He'd seen where blind loyalty led. But loyalty rooted in respect and justice was different. Brienne studied him, her eyes reflecting the torchlight. Then let's hope it doesn't come to that. Too much blood has been spilled. He nodded and they continued on, a shared weight settled between them. Time marched forward and events in the south accelerated. Ravens came almost weekly with updates. Daenerys had seized King's Landing with minimal bloodshed after the small council ceded it without much resistance. The rumors claimed that she had locked certain corrupt lords in cells, but declared she was not her father reborn. She restored order, or so the letter said, with the help of Tyrion Lannister as her hand. Jaime's heart jerked at that news. His brother lived and held a place of power. He felt an odd, mingled relief and fear. Tyrion might be the best chance for peace, or he might be Daenerys' key to shattering the North's defiance. Tension in Winterfell rose. Some whispered that Daenerys would march soon. Others believed she would offer the North a treaty. Sansa reinforced the castle's defenses, quietly stockpiling provisions. Jaime oversaw some of the fortifications, advising the master-at-arms where to strengthen the walls, how to position archers. He worked closely with Brienne, who commanded the training of the guards and any volunteers who wished to learn swordplay. In rare moments of calm, Jaime and Brienne found themselves walking the ramparts under the pale northern sky. A hush often stretched between them, comfortable yet weighted with the unspoken. Their near closeness had not escalated into something more tangible, but it remained an undercurrent, an unacknowledged bond that sustained them in the long, cold nights. Jaime sometimes ached for more, for the warmth of her presence beside him, a deeper solace that might ease the guilt and loneliness that gnawed at him. But he hesitated, not wanting to taint what they shared with the ghosts of his past. One afternoon, a horn sounded at the gates. Jaime, helping a group of guards arrange sharpened stakes, looked up to see riders approaching, a small envoy in Targaryen colors. The lead rider bore a banner with a three-headed dragon. Jaime's pulse quickened. So it begins, he thought. The watchers on the wall called for the gates to open, under instructions from Sansa that envoys were permitted. Jaime climbed the steps to the battlements, wanting to see who had come. The group was small, just half a dozen. At their head rode a woman cloaked in rich black fur, the Targaryen sigil prominent on her breast. Beside her was an older knight in polished armor, and behind, a few guards. Jaime couldn't see the woman's face clearly from this vantage, but he could sense the tension rolling through the watchers. A hush fell as Sansa and her retinue emerged in the courtyard to greet the arrivals. Brienne stood at Sansa's right hand, posture stiff with readiness. Jaime's chest tightened. He descended to join them. By the time he reached the courtyard, the Targaryen envoy had dismounted. The woman removed her hood, revealing silver hair pulled back in an intricate braid. She was not Daenerys, perhaps one of her advisors or distant kin, though Targaryens were said to be rare. Her cheekbones were sharp and her eyes a pale violet. She inclined her head to Sansa. "I am Myrcella Targaryen, a cousin to the queen, sent on her behalf." Sansa's voice was cool, polite. "Welcome to Winterfell, Myrcella Targaryen. You have come a long way." The woman surveyed the courtyard. "We bring word from her grace, Queen Daenerys of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men," she intoned. Her gaze settled briefly on Jaime, flickering with curiosity before returning to Sansa. She invites Lady Sansa Stark to pledge her fealty or discuss terms of peaceful coexistence. The Queen has claimed the Iron Throne and seeks to unite all the realm. A ripple of reaction traveled through the gathered onlookers. Sansa's chin lifted slightly. "I see. Does she plan to ride north with her dragons if we do not yield?" Myrcella offered a thin smile. "Her grace hopes diplomacy will suffice. She does not wish to repeat her father's mistakes. However, the realm is best served under one banner, not fractured by old divisions." Sansa studied her, eyes sharp. "The North has bled too often under Southern rule. We declared our independence. We did not war against your queen, nor did we abet her enemies." She paused. "If she wishes an audience, she can come herself. We will hear her, but I make no promises of bending the knee." Myrcella's thin smile held. "Her grace will be pleased to hear you are open to discussion. Will you accept a meeting on neutral ground, perhaps at Moat Cailin? She wishes to avoid bringing large armies into the north out of respect." Sansa exchanged a glance with Brienne, then Jaime. Brienne gave a subtle nod. Jaime tried to read Sansa's expression, seeing the wheels turning. Finally, Sansa answered, "Very well. I will travel to Moat Cailin with a modest escort. We can speak further. But if this is a trap—" "It is no trap," Myrcella interrupted. "Daenerys desires peace and prosperity for all. She knows the horrors that war can bring." She cast Jaime a lingering look. He stood behind Sansa, expression guarded. Sansa inclined her head. "We shall see. You may rest here tonight if you wish." Myrcella nodded, a flicker of relief in her eyes. "Thank you, my lady. We have traveled far. My men and I welcome the hospitality of House Stark." With that, the meeting concluded. Servants bustled forward to guide the Targaryen envoys to guest quarters. Sansa and Brienne walked away together, heads bent in low conversation. Jaime remained behind for a moment, absorbing what had just occurred. A trickle of apprehension slid through him. Meeting Daenerys Targaryen could change everything. He recalled the day he'd killed Aerys, saving the city from Wildfire. Would she hold it against him, or praise him for stopping her father's madness? And what of Tyrion? Would he greet Jaime as a brother, or treat him as a traitor to their house? That night, Sansa called a council of her most trusted supporters, including Brienne and Jaime. She declared her intent to ride south to Moat Cailin with a modest retinue, Brienne, Arya, a handful of guards, and possibly Jaime if he so chose. The question lay before him like a blade in the dark. Should he accompany them and face Daenerys' envoy or remain in Winterfell? Sansa turned to him, amber hair shimmering in the torchlight. "Sir Jaime, your knowledge of King's Landing and the Targaryens' approach may be valuable. But I do not wish to force you to go. This might be dangerous if Daenerys knows your role in her father's death." Jaime inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her words. Brienne's eyes lingered on him. He thought of that day when he'd slid a sword through Aerys' back, the king's blood coating the throne room floor. He recalled the fear that Aerys would ignite the wildfire, ending countless lives. Despite the terror, Jaime had done what he believed right. Still, Daenerys might see only a kingslayer who murdered her father. Yet how could he hide in Winterfell while Sansa risked everything? He cleared his throat, nodding once. "I'll go. If I can help achieve peace or ensure your safety, I must." A spark of gratitude glimmered in Sansa's eyes. "Thank you. We leave in 3 days." Brienne exhaled, a hint of relief on her face. "Then we prepare? It won't be easy, but at least we have a chance to speak before any armies march." Jaime tried to steady the flutter in his stomach. As the council dispersed, he remained behind a moment, staring at the flickering candle on the table. He could almost hear Cersei's voice whispering that Targaryens couldn't be trusted, that madness ran in their blood. But he shook off the memory, reminding himself that not all children became their parents. If Daenerys truly intended to rule with mercy, perhaps they could avoid more devastation. When he left the chamber, Brienne waited in the hall. She studied him carefully, a gentle concern etched into her features. "You're certain?" she asked. "I won't pretend this is without risk." He allowed a small, wry smile. "My entire life has been risk and regret. If there's a chance to prevent another war, I'll take it." He hesitated, then placed a hand on her forearm. I'm glad you'll be there as well. She nodded, placing her own hand over his. That silent contact spoke volumes. Then we do this together. In the following days, preparations bustled. Horses were readied, supplies packed. The Targaryen envoy set off ahead of them to inform Daenerys of Sansa's acceptance. Arya sharpened her blades, silent but resolute, while Sansa delegated castle duties to a trusted steward for the days she'd be gone. Jaime and Brienne spent hours reviewing the route, discussing contingencies if negotiations soured. Then, on a crisp morning, the small party rode out. Winter's pall clung to the land, but the sky was a startling blue, offering a rare measure of sunshine. Jaime rode near Sansa, Brienne on the other side, Arya scouting ahead. The road unfurled before them. Behind them, Winterfell's walls receded, dwarfed by the vastness of the northern plains. Every beat of hooves on frozen ground reminded Jaime how fragile this peace was. One misstep and the north could be plunged into a war with dragons. At night, they camped in small encampments, watchfires crackling. Sansa seldom revealed her inner anxiety, maintaining a calm front for the guards and her companions. Arya took watch shifts with uncanny vigilance, seeming to need little sleep. Jaime sometimes glimpsed her in the darkness, pacing the perimeter or cleaning her dagger with a thoughtful frown. He realized that the Stark sisters had all changed under the crucible of war. On the third day, they crossed the swampy terrain near Moat Cailin, the ancient stronghold that once guarded the north from southern invasion. Its towers were half-ruined, the moat choked with moss and stagnant water. The narrow causeway forced them into single file. Mist clung to the marshes, swirling around the hooves of their horses. When they reached the far side, they saw encampments of Targaryen soldiers, banners bearing the three-headed dragon snapping in the wind. A line of unsullied guards flanked the approach, their faces unreadable behind helmets. Jaime's pulse hammered. He'd heard stories of Daenerys's unsullied legions, fearless, disciplined, loyal to the death. Sansa and her companions halted at the outer ring, waiting. Presently, a tall man in dark armor emerged, followed by a few attendants. He introduced himself as Grey Worm, commander of the Unsullied, and invited Sansa to meet with Daenerys in a large tent erected inside the stronghold's courtyard. They dismounted, leaving most of their escorts behind. Jaime and Brienne flanked Sansa, while Arya moved with silent poise at her sister's side. The ruinous walls of Moat Cailin loomed overhead, black stone corroded by centuries. Torches flickered, casting dancing light across the wet ground. Unsullied soldiers stood at attention, eerily silent. Jaime spotted a few Dothraki warriors too, their curved rocks gleaming. The Targaryen queen commanded a diverse host. Inside the grand tent, the air was warmer, heavy with the scent of incense. Thick carpets covered the ground. At the far end stood Daenerys Targaryen, regal in a gown of black and red. Her silver-gold hair fell in braids over her shoulders, and her posture was straight as a spear. To her left stood Tyrion Lannister, wearing fine robes and a careful expression. Jaime's breath caught at the sight of his younger brother. Tyrion's eyes flicked to him, widening slightly in recognition before quickly settling into a neutral mask. To Daenerys's right stood a large man with a worn face and calculating stare, likely Ser Jorah Mormont, if rumors held true. Sansa paused, meeting Daenerys's gaze. The queen inclined her head. "Lady Sansa Stark, I'm pleased you accepted my invitation." Sansa offered a similarly cool nod. "Queen Daenerys, I come in the hope of avoiding further conflict." Daenerys's lips curved in a slight smile. "We share that hope." Her gaze moved beyond Sansa, settling on Brienne, Arya, and finally Jaime. The queen's expression shifted the moment she recognized him. A flicker of tension, a flash of anger, then her composure returned. "I see you've brought the Kingslayer, the man who killed my father." An uneasy hush fell. Jaime's heart pounded. He forced himself to keep his chin up, meeting Daenerys's eyes. "I did," Sansa said calmly. "He serves House Stark now, and he is here in good faith, just as we are." Daenerys's voice grew tight. "Good faith? Yes, well, we will speak of that soon enough." She gestured to the chairs arranged before her. "Sit, please. We have matters to discuss." Sansa took the central seat, Brienne and Jaime standing behind her, while Arya positioned herself subtly near the edge of the gathering. Tyrion moved closer to Daenerys, clearing his throat. "If we may, let's begin with an understanding of what the North seeks and what her grace offers." Sansa's face remained impassive. "The North seeks independence. We fought for it, we earned it. We will not bend the knee to another southern monarch. We have no desire for war, but we will not submit." Daenerys's slender hands clenched on the arms of her seat. "Your ancestors once swore loyalty to House Targaryen. My birthright is the 7 kingdoms united, not fragmented. But I have no wish to spill more blood." I propose you pledge fealty, and in return you maintain dominion over your lands with local rule and self-governance. Sansa's brow furrowed. That is not independence. It's another form of subjugation. A taut silence fell. Jaime's throat went dry. He could sense the rising tension in every line of Daenerys's posture, see the battle of wills behind Sansa's calm facade. Tyrion stepped in, diplomatic. We can find a compromise. Perhaps the North can maintain greater autonomy than any other region with the right to govern itself and manage local affairs. The Queen's rule would be largely symbolic, ensuring unity in times of external threat. Sansa's eyes flicked to Tyrion, then back to Daenerys. Symbolic or not, it's still subservience. You speak of unity, but the North has only known tyranny from the Iron Throne. What guarantee do we have that we won't be used, taxed, or manipulated again? Daenerys's cheeks flushed. I am not Cersei Lannister. I'm not the Mad King. I bring freedom to those who bend the knee willingly. My dragons will not burn the North unless forced by rebellion or betrayal. She shot Jaime a pointed look, and a thrill of dread ran through him. Sansa raised her chin. And if we choose not to bend the knee, is that rebellion? Daenerys's voice cooled. Yes, but I do not wish war, Lady Sansa. I have lost too many dear to me. I would rather make you an ally. You have proven yourself a strong ruler. I value strength. Together we could usher in a new era of peace, shaped by our shared experiences rather than old grudges. Sansa's gaze flickered. Jaime guessed she was weighing the realities. Even with Winterfell's defenses, they could not withstand Dragonfire and a Targaryen army. Nor did she want her people slaughtered. But the taste of bending the knee after all the North had endured was bitter indeed. Jaime's mind churned. Was there a third path, some arrangement that allowed the North near complete freedom while Daenerys reigned in name only? Suddenly, Daenerys turned her attention fully to Jaime. And what do you think, Kingslayer? Should the North trust me not to repeat my father's madness? Every gaze swung to him. Jaime swallowed, aware of how dangerous this was. I only know what your father intended, he said carefully. He would have burned King's Landing, killing thousands. I stopped him because it was the right thing to do. He forced himself to hold her gaze. If you were truly different, if you rule with mercy, then yes, you can earn the realm's trust. But trust is not given blindly. And if you threaten the North with Dragonfire, you'll confirm the worst fears they have about Targaryens. A deadly hush ensued. Daenerys's eyes narrowed, but Tyrion placed a gentle hand on her arm. He speaks the truth, your grace. You've promised to break the wheel, to be a queen unlike those before you. Threatening the North might achieve compliance, but not true loyalty. Daenerys exhaled, some of her rigidity easing. I see you've grown bold, brother, she said to Tyrion softly, though not without a certain wry note. Then she flicked her gaze back to Jaime. You took my father's life. For that I once vowed revenge. But I've learned that hatred alone will not build the world I want. Perhaps you saved King's Landing from a terrible fate. So I'll not punish you for an act you believe just. But mind you, if you betray me as you did your king, I will not be so merciful. Jaime inclined his head, heart pounding. I understand, your grace. Sansa exhaled, tension rolling off her shoulders in a subtle wave. We are here to find accord, not to litigate old wounds. Let us consider how best to protect our people and your realm without demanding the North's complete subjugation. They negotiated for hours. Words circled around formal independence versus a vassal-like arrangement. Daenerys offered trade deals, mutual defense pacts, the promise that no southern lord would hold sway over northern courts. Sansa remained cool, pressing for every guarantee. Tyrion acted as mediator, deftly balancing Daenerys' desire to unify the realm with Sansa's insistence on near autonomy. Jaime occasionally interjected with cautious support, while Arya hovered, silent but watchful, her presence a reminder that any betrayal would be met swiftly. As the night wore on, a tentative framework emerged. The North would acknowledge Daenerys as Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, but with an agreement that they would manage their own taxes, laws, and leadership. Daenerys would not station Unsullied or Dothraki troops in the North unless invited. In return, Sansa would pledge not to ally with any rebellion or foreign power against the throne. The arrangement was fragile, a compromise that satisfied neither side fully. Yet it might avert war. Both women seemed exhausted by the time a scribe finished drafting the initial outlines. At last, Daenerys rose. We should sleep on these terms. Tomorrow, we can finalize details if we remain in agreement. She offered Sansa a measured nod. I appreciate your willingness to meet. Sansa stood as well, bowing her head with equal courtesy. As do I. May our next conversation be as civil. With that, the meeting ended. Attendants ushered them out. Jaime caught Tyrion's eye as they filed into the dim courtyard. The smaller man gave a subtle nod, then murmured something to Daenerys, who granted him permission to linger. Jaime waited, letting Sansa, Brienne, and Arya return to their own camp. Soon, Tyrion approached, hands clasped behind his back. The night air was chill, their breath visible. Tyrion's eyes flicked over Jaime's fur cloak, the golden hand at his side. "Brother," he said quietly, "you look older." Jaime let out a shaky breath. "We've both aged, it seems. You, the hand of the queen. Me, a knight in the service of House Stark. Did you ever imagine such an outcome?" Tyrion's mouth curved in a sad smile. "I gave up trying to predict fate. I'm simply glad to see you alive." His gaze sharpened. "I heard rumors you killed Cersei, that you prevented her from blowing up King's Landing again." Jaime's chest constricted. She meant to unleash wildfire on the city if she lost her grip on power. "I did what had to be done. For the realm, and because He trailed off, the pain of that memory simmering. "I loved her. She was lost." Tyrion's expression flickered with empathy and sorrow. "I grieve for the sister we once knew, though she was never an easy person to love." He sighed, pushing a strand of hair behind his ear. "I guess we're all that's left of House Lannister now." Jaime nodded. "We are, and we're on opposite sides again, in a way." Tyrion's brow wrinkled. "I'd prefer to think we're working toward the same goal, peace. My queen wants a realm united without unnecessary bloodshed. Do you believe she'll hold to this compromise with Sansa?" Jaime considered, remembering the conversation. "If she's genuine about being a different ruler than her forebears, yes. If the North keeps its side of the bargain and acknowledges her, she has no reason to burn them out. But if she feels slighted or threatened," Tyrion sighed, "then we'll have war." "Yes," Jaime said simply, "or more precisely, Dragonfire. The North can't stand against that." He hesitated, studying his brother's face in the torchlight. "But I'll do what I must to protect Sansa's people. She's shown me kindness I didn't deserve." Tyrion's voice softened. "I'm glad you found a measure of redemption. We all have our demons, Jaime. I hope we can work together, if it comes to that." A faint smile tugged at Jaime's lips. "That would be a sight. Lannister brothers, forging peace." He rubbed the stump of his wrist, wincing at a flare of phantom pain. "I should go. Sansa will want to discuss tomorrow's signing." Tyrion nodded. "Take care, brother. I'll be here, trying to soothe any of Daenerys's lingering doubts. She's lost much too. She's forging a new path as best she can." Jaime clapped Tyrion lightly on the shoulder. "Good luck." They parted, each stepping back into their respective roles, Jaime as a Stark retainer, Tyrion as the Queen's hand. Outside the tent, the night was still. Moat Caelan's crumbling towers loomed under a partial moon. Jaime trudged back to the Stark encampment. He found Brienne near the fire, tension writ on her features. When she saw him, she exhaled. "Well?" He sank onto a log beside her, letting the fire's warmth thaw his numb fingers. "I spoke with Tyrion. He seems genuinely committed to peace. If Daenerys and Sansa can finalize these terms, maybe we can avoid a war." Brienne nodded, expression cautious. "I hope so. Sansa isn't eager to kneel, but she also knows the alternative is devastation." Jaime shifted, seeking her gaze. The firelight revealed the hint of concern etched between her brows. "You fought for Renly, then for Catelyn Stark, then for Sansa. Did you ever think you'd stand in a tent with a Targaryen queen, forging treaties?" She gave a short, soft laugh. "No. My only oath was to protect the innocent, to keep my word. The realm's riddles are more complex than I imagined." He reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her glove. "We do what we can. One day, one cause at a time." The contact lingered, a silent affirmation of the bond that had grown between them. He thought of how different they both were from the people who first crossed paths in the Riverlands, slinging insults amid mutual distrust. Morning brought a final meeting with Daenerys. Under Tyrion's watchful eye, Sansa and the Queen approved a written agreement. The North would be considered a kingdom under the Iron Throne, but with extraordinary autonomy. Dragons would not fly over the North without express invitation. Taxes would be minimal, trade routes open, and in times of great peril, such as a foreign invasion, the North would lend aid, as would the Crown. Sansa signed reluctantly, but she signed. Daenerys added her mark with a flourish. The atmosphere was tense but tinged with a fragile hope. They bowed politely, but no warm greetings were exchanged. It was an uneasy peace, reliant on trust that might falter at any slight. Still, it was better than war. When all was done, Daenerys addressed Jaime directly. "You have chosen to serve House Stark. I respect loyalty so long as it does not become treachery. May we never find ourselves crossing swords. For if we do, I fear there would be no mercy left." Jaime inclined his head, a subtle shiver trailing down his spine. "Let's hope it never comes to that, Your Grace." She swept from the tent, cloak billowing. The Targaryen host began dismantling the camp. Soon, they would head south, returning to King's Landing or Dragonstone. Tyrion exchanged a final glance with Jaime across the courtyard, offering a faint smile before following his queen. Sansa wasted no time leading the Stark party away from Moat Cailin, eager to put distance between herself and a force that could obliterate them if offended. The ride back felt strangely light, as though a storm had passed. But Jaime knew the aftermath of storms could be treacherous, leaving hidden hazards and weakened foundations. Still, if this treaty held, the North would remain mostly free. The final shape of the realm was uncertain, but for now war was averted. As they trudged north, Jaime caught Brienne's eye, sharing a slight nod. One hurdle overcome, many yet to come. But they faced them side by side, guided by a sense that they could shape a better future than the one they had inherited. Back at Winterfell, word spread of the treaty. Some were relieved, while others muttered about kneeling to another Targaryen. Sansa worked tirelessly to reassure them that the North's autonomy was nearly absolute, only giving a nominal acknowledgement of Daenerys' overlordship. Jaime found himself defending the agreement among some of the more skeptical guards, reminding them that dragons cared little for men's pride. "Better to sign a parchment than feed the flames," he would say. The weeks that followed saw no immediate sign of Targaryen interference. Daenerys focused on consolidating her rule in the south, reorganizing King's Landing, and dealing with the aftermath of Cersei's destructive reign. Letters came occasionally, couched in diplomatic language. Sansa responded in kind, maintaining a veneer of respect without ceding more ground than necessary. Amid this new peace, Jaime and Brienne's companionship blossomed in subtle ways. They shared quiet moments after training, walked the battlements in the hush of early dawn, exchanged hushed confidences by candlelight. The ghosts of their old lives lingered, but in each other's presence, they found a semblance of acceptance. Jaime slowly realized that each day brought him a step further from the tragedies he'd caused and endured. He was still haunted, yes, but he was no longer defined solely by his sins. One evening, deep in winter, snow drifted lazily across the courtyard. Jaime and Brienne ventured into the godwood where the ancient weirwood stood. Its white bark and red leaves glimmered in the moonlight, the carved face watching them with timeless serenity. Jaime was not a devout believer in the old gods or the new, but the godswood's hush held a kind of solemn magic he could appreciate. They walked beneath the twisted branches, boots crunching on fresh snow. Brienne paused by the heart tree, glancing at the carved visage. "Lady Catelyn once prayed here," she said softly, remembering the woman who had entrusted her with caring for Sansa. "I used to think prayers were all but useless. Now I wonder if sometimes the old gods listen." Jaime stepped closer, feeling a hush descend. "If they do, maybe they can sense your devotion. You've kept your vows better than most knights ever do." She turned to him, breath visible in the cold. "And you, Jaime? Do you still believe in vows?" He smiled wryly. "I believe in doing what's right, vow or not. I learned the hard way that vows can conflict, and sometimes you have to break one to honor another." Her gaze lingered on him, something tender stirring there. "You've changed. From the arrogant man I first knew." He brushed a stray snowflake from her cloak. "You changed me," he admitted quietly. "You showed me a kind of honor I'd never understood. And you made me want to be better." A small flush warmed her cheeks. "I only did what was just." He swallowed, heart pounding. "Then let me do something just too." Gently, he took her hands in his, the metal of his golden hand a cold counterpoint to the warmth of his real one. Her fingers were calloused but steady. Snow drifted around them, silent and slow. He leaned in, lips brushing hers in a tentative kiss. She stiffened for a heartbeat, then relaxed, returning the kiss softly. The hush of the god would envelop them, the old tree's carved face witnessing a moment of quiet, fragile intimacy. When they parted, he saw that tears glimmered in her eyes, though her expression was not sad, rather something akin to relief and acceptance. He held her close for a moment, feeling the thud of her heart against his chest, the cold air on his cheeks. The world outside might still be dangerous, might still demand they take up swords in defense of innocence or face dragons from the south. But here, in the godwood under drifting snow, Jaime Lannister finally felt at peace. Brienne was a reality stronger than his guilt or fear, a reminder that even the most broken knight could find a cause worth living for and perhaps a person worth loving. In the weeks that followed, they navigated this new bond quietly, discreetly. Sansa was no fool. Jaime suspected she sensed the warmth growing between them, but she made no comment. Arya, ever watchful, raised an eyebrow once or twice, but said nothing. The castle's whispering staff might have opinions, but none dared voice them openly. If the Knight of Tarth and the Kingslayer found solace together, it was their own affair. Rumors drifted occasionally of further shifts in King's Landing, Daenerys forming a grand council, Tyrion working to re-establish trade routes, the Iron Bank reasserting its claims. But so far, no call came summoning the North to bend further or send troops. The uneasy truce held. Spring teased at the edges of winter. The days grew marginally longer, the sun occasionally peeking through the clouds, turning the snowmelt into small rivulets. People spoke of planting, of possibly a mild harvest if the thaw continued. Jaime helped oversee the forges, ensuring Winterfell's armory was stocked with well-crafted weapons just in case. He also sparred with the younger recruits, training them with Brienne's assistance. He found satisfaction in guiding them, warning them against arrogance, teaching them to value life above petty glory. Sometimes, in the hush of night, he woke with nightmares of Cersei, or Ares, or the Wildfire. But a comforting presence beside him dispelled the worst of the terrors. He was no saint, still wrestling with the weight of his past. Yet each new day reminded him that redemption was not a single act, it was a lifetime's commitment to do better. At last, one bright morning, a raven arrived from the south. It bore the Targaryen seal. Sansa gathered her advisors to read it. Daenerys invited them to King's Landing for a grand council. She planned to establish a more representative form of governance, a break from absolute monarchy. Jaime saw Sansa's brows lift at the audacity. A break from monarchy, from the woman who calls herself queen, she murmured. Tyrion's letter explained that Daenerys wanted to incorporate voices from every region to avoid the mistakes of past rulers. The letter insisted that the North's presence was crucial. Sansa mulled it over, uncertain. Some lords in Winterfell scoffed at the idea, others thought it a chance to ensure the North's interests were safeguarded. After debate, Sansa agreed to attend, cautioning that she would go with a small entourage, just as before, to show trust but not submission. 2 weeks later, Jaime Lannister found himself riding south again, this time toward King's Landing. Brienne rode with him, as did Sansa, a cadre of northern lords, and Arya once more. The roads were muddy from snowmelt, the air slowly warming. Fields showed patches of green. Villagers emerged from winter's grip, eyes bright with the prospect of a new season. Many eyed the passing retinue warily, but no hostility flared. As they neared the Crownlands, Jaime's memories surfaced, each milestone on the road reminding him of the times he had traveled this route as a Lannister prince in all but name, or as a Kingsguard galloping to quell rebellions. Now he returned in the service of House Stark, part of a fragile alliance with a Targaryen queen. The wheel of fate turned in ways he never expected. They saw the city from afar, the red keep's towers gleaming in the sun. Jaime's throat tightened. He recalled countless days patrolling those walls, nights slipping into Cersei's chambers, the final confrontation that ended in her death. Yet the city remained, spared the green flames that once threatened it. For that, at least, he felt a measure of grim satisfaction. A Targaryen guard escorted them through the gates, down streets that bore signs of reconstruction. Rubble from the September's destruction had been cleared, replaced by new construction efforts. People thronged the roads, some cheering the Stark banners, others simply gawking. Jaime noticed fewer scowls than before. Perhaps Daenerys' changes had improved the small folks' lot. Or perhaps they were just tired of war. They dismounted in the Red Keep's courtyard, a place that bristled with old ghosts for Jaime. He saw the tower windows where once he had stood guard outside the king's chambers, the corridor leading to the throne room where he had confronted Cersei. The castle felt both familiar and alien. Sansa, face composed, looked around with the steady poise of a ruler surveying foreign territory. Arya's gaze flickered from shadow to shadow. Brienne remained at Sansa's side, her posture erect, ready for anything. They were led to comfortable chambers, where they freshened up. That evening, a feast was held in the throne room. Jaime entered with the Stark retinue, feeling his heart pound at the sight of the Iron Throne. A mass of swords molten into a seat, the same dais where he had slain Ares. Daenerys sat upon it now, regal in black and red. Tyrion by her side. Lords and ladies from across the realm filled the hall, curious and wary. The tension was palpable, yet a veneer of civility coated the gathering. Sansa offered Daenerys a polite bow, then took her seat at a table of honor. Jaime and Brienne stood behind her, scanning the crowd. Wine flowed, courses were served, and conversation crackled with underlying caution. Daenerys made a toast to unity and renewal, praising the North's presence. Sansa responded with careful gratitude. Tyrion tried to lighten the mood with witticisms. Laughter was sparse. After the feast, groups formed around the hall. Some lords debated trade policies. Others whispered about the Queen's rumored changes to the system of governance. Jaime stuck close to Sansa, though his eyes drifted to the old dais. An uneasy memory pulled him toward it, and eventually, he excused himself from Sansa's side for a moment. He ascended the steps, hand gliding over the scorched metal. He could almost see Aerys's mad grin, hear his shriek of "burn them all," felt like stepping into a ghost's footsteps. "How does it feel to stand where you killed him?" Daenerys's voice startled him. He turned to see her behind the throne, shadows playing across her face. He swallowed. "Strange. It was a lifetime ago, and yet I remember every heartbeat of that moment." She studied him, arms folded. "I know the city was spared a terrible fate. My father's madness would have destroyed it. Tyrion explained it to me in detail. Still, it's difficult to reconcile the father I never knew with the monster you describe." He breathed out slowly, guilt and defiance mingling. "I did my duty to the people. I regret the stain it left on my honor, but not the act itself." He met her eyes. "If you truly want to break the wheel of tyranny, then you understand the cost of letting mad rulers remain in power." A flicker of melancholy crossed her features. "I do, and I appreciate your honesty. But do not forget, Ser Jaime, if tyranny arises again, dragon or lion or wolf, I will stand against it." He nodded, ironically at peace with that stance. "As would I." She gave a ghost of a smile, then descended the dais, leaving him to the hush of memories. In that instant, Jaime felt a surge of hope that maybe, just maybe, the realm had turned a corner. Daenerys' presence here, her willingness to speak of change, might herald a better era. The North's fragile alliance with the Iron Throne might hold if both sides kept their promises. He glanced once more at the throne's jagged metal and turned away, descending to rejoin Brienne and Sansa. The next day, the Grand Council began. Lords from Dorne, the Vale, the Stormlands, the Reach, the Westerlands, what remained of House Lannister's vassals, the Iron Islands, and the North gathered in the throne room where an array of chairs had been set in a circular arrangement. Daenerys presided, flanked by Tyrion, with the rest arrayed around her in an unprecedented style of discussion. Instead of commands from the throne, they debated each issue openly: trade tariffs, laws about succession, the role of the faith, the state of the Night's Watch, especially now that the White Walkers had been rumored to exist, though many doubted. Sansa spoke for the North, her calm voice cutting through heated arguments. She insisted on minimal interference from the crown. Dorne demanded reparation for old Lannister-sponsored atrocities. The Iron Islands pressed for more autonomy. Tyrion guided the session, reminding them that they aimed to shape a new governance that allowed for voices from all regions, a partial council, partial monarchy. Jaime watched from the sidelines, impressed by the scope of what Daenerys attempted. Perhaps she truly would be the queen who changed the very foundations of the realm. Her disclaimers, "I do not wish absolute power, but a stable realm," echoed again and again. She proposed a council of lords to advise the crown, with each region holding a seat. It was radical, a step toward checks and balances. Not quite democracy, but something beyond traditional feudal rule. The lords debated fiercely, but slowly a framework emerged. A small council of representatives from each region, with the queen retaining the final say on matters of war and high justice. The faith would remain separate from governance to prevent zealotry. The Night's Watch would continue as a refuge for criminals who sought redemption and as watchers on the wall, though their role was uncertain. Slowly, resolutions settled, hammered out in discussions that spanned days, with breaks for feasting, private negotiations, and forging alliances. Through it all, Sansa remained firm, ensuring the North's near-autonomous status was enshrined. The other lords recognized the symbolic power of a region that had effectively gained independence. In a concession that stunned some, Daenerys granted the North's singular right to choose its local rulers without interference from the crown in exchange for a vow of mutual defense in times of external threat. The final shape was messy and incomplete, but it was progress. On the final day of the council, Daenerys and Sansa signed a new charter, witnessed by every lord present. Tyrion read its key points aloud, a hush over the throne room. When he finished, cautious applause rippled. The realm had never seen such a document, an agreement limiting the crown's absolute power and granting each region representation. A tapestry of old grudges and new beginnings wove through the crowd. Some looked hopeful, others wary. But in that moment, there was unity, however tenuous. Sansa and Daenerys met each other's gaze across the circle. No friendship blossomed there, but a mutual respect had formed. Daenerys spoke, her voice echoing, "May we never again see the devastation that befell this realm in the wars of the past. The Iron Throne serves the people, not the other way around." Sansa inclined her head. "And may the North and all the kingdoms prosper, side by side, without tyranny." Amid the subdued cheer, Jaime caught Brienne's eyes and saw relief mirrored there. He thought of the day he'd killed Cersei to save King's Landing, the day he'd murdered Aerys to save the realm. All that blood had led here to a moment where the realm might be reborn. He felt a weight lift from his soul, even as he knew there would be conflicts ahead. But for now, there was peace and a promise of change. That night, in the courtyard of the Red Keep, Jaime paused under the pale moonlight, gazing at the city that sprawled below. Brienne found him there, her presence quietly anchoring him. Together, they looked upon King's Landing, where once it seemed certain that green fire would devour everything. Now, the city breathed with renewed life. He turned to her, gratitude and something deeper shining in his eyes. "We did it," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "We helped shape a peace I never thought possible." She laid a hand on his shoulder. "The realm may not fully understand what you sacrificed, but it endures because of your choices." He stepped closer, heart pounding. Gently, he cupped her cheek, feeling the faint warmth of her skin. She leaned in, her breath soft, and their lips met in a tender kiss. The ghosts of the past drifted away like embers on the wind, leaving only the present and a faint hope for the future. Far above, the stars glimmered over a city that had known too much blood. But tonight, for the first time in years, Jaime Lannister felt something akin to peace. He was not the golden lion of Casterly Rock, not the Kingslayer weighed down by scandal, not the man defined by incestuous devotion to a doomed queen. He was simply Jaime, a knight who had chosen to save the realm he once helped break. And in that choice, he had found redemption, a cause, and a love that did not devour him, but instead offered the faint glow of hope in a land battered by darkness. So the moon rose, silver and silent, over the Red Keep's ancient stones. The wind carried the promise of a gentler dawn, and the realm, scarred though it was, settled into a fragile new era. No one could say how long the peace would last or what storms might come. But for Jaime Lannister, in that moment, standing with Brienne amid the heart of the realm he had twice saved, it was enough. He could almost feel the city breathing beneath him, alive with possibility. And for the first time in his life, Jaime allowed himself to believe that he was worthy of the life he had fought, against all odds, to preserve.